Meenu, over to you when Zoom says.
Namaste and greetings. I am Meenu Mohan, Research Intern at IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, New Delhi, Prabhav Evam Niti Anusandhan Sansthan, Nai Delhi. I extend a warm welcome to all of you for joining us today for the inaugural session of the Feminist Foreign Policy Fellowship, FFPF, an online international winter school program. This 3-month Immersive Leadership Certificate Training Fellowship is proudly brought to you by the IMPRI Center for International Relations and Strategic Studies and the IMPRI Gender Impact Studies Center in collaboration with the Asia Foundation. Our previous program, Feminist Foreign Policy, Past, Present, and Future, saw participation from more than 6,500 individuals. The overwhelming response and inspiring engagement with the feminist discourse from that program have encouraged us to bring this fellowship to life with the aim of fostering new literature and knowledge creation around feminist foreign policy, particularly with a focus on the global south. We are here to embark on a transformative journey, exploring feminist foreign policy as a pivotal framework for creating just, inclusive, and equitable international relations. We are thrilled to announce that after a rigorous selection process from over 1,100 registrations, approximately 60 fellows have been chosen for the fellowship. The competition was intense, with the committee facing significant challenges due to the exceptional quality of the applications. As a part of this fellowship, over the next 3 months, you will engage with distinguished global experts, participate in dynamic discussions, and gain valuable insights into feminist approaches to foreign policy and leadership. Our chair for this program is Professor Vibhuti Patel, visiting distinguished professor at IMPRI and former professor at Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Mumbai. We are grateful for her continued guidance and leadership. The program experts for this fellowship are Ms. Stephenie Foster, Professor Sanjukta Bhattacharya, Ambassador Anil Trigunayat, Ambassador Lata Reddy, Professor Anuradha M. Chenoy, Ms. Wahida Nainar, Dr. Keshav Giri, Ms. Nandita Baruah, Dr. Simi Mehta, Professor Asha Hans, Ms. Rita Manchanda, Dr. Swarna Rajagopalan, Dr. Deepika Mann, Dr. Manisha Madhava, Professor Mariam Sidat Khan, Professor Swaran Singh, Professor Manisha Desai, and Dr. Athika Noor Alami. The conveners for this course are Ms. Nandita Baruah, Ms. Apurva Singh, Dr. Arjun Kumar, and Dr. Simi Mehta. Our knowledge partners in this endeavor are Department of English and Department of Political Science and History, Christ University, Bangalore, Miranda House College, School of Law, G.D. Goenka University, Department of International Relations, Sikkim University, and Symbiosis School of International Studies, Department of Politics and International Studies, Pondicherry University. And the coordinators for this course are Mr. Satyam Tripathi, Ms. Vinita Jha, and Ms. Shweta Shankar Paidimari. We will share video recordings of each session to support flexible learning at your convenience. The guidelines document will be emailed to you after the session for your perusal. Before we start today's session, I would like to announce the housekeeping rules. It is imperative that you join the meeting on time. There will be a Q&A session after each presentation. Share your thoughts in the Q&A box and not in the chat box. The questions must not be posted as an anonymous attendee. Ensure that your questions are precise. Refrain from making general comments in the question to save time. We are honored to begin today's proceedings with the fellowship launch address by Ms. Nandita Baruah, country representative for the Asia Foundation India, who will share insights into the vision and mission of this program. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Meenu. A very good afternoon and evening and also good morning. I think it's very, very heartening to see that we have group of fellows who have joined from different parts of South Asia and beyond, also as Southeast Asia, as I understand. And so I'm really thrilled to have had the opportunity to be a part of this journey with IMPRI. So greetings to colleagues from IMPRI, Dr. Simi, Dr. Arjun, Dr. Vibhuti Patel, And also greetings to Ms. Stephenie Foster for taking time out from your extremely busy schedule to really address us today uh, on this very first session and setting the tone for the discourse. Um, I'm Nandita Baruah from the Asia Foundation, and I'm the country head of the Asia Foundation. For those of you who may not know too much about the foundation, just in 2 seconds, the Asia Foundation is an international development agency. We are both a think tank and a development sector funding organization. We operate at the cusp of the two. We have country offices in 19 countries, including the Asia Pacific, and we are headquartered out of the US, San Francisco and Washington, D.C. It is really a pleasure to be a part of this, emerging discourse for South Asia, not an emerging discourse on feminist foreign policy, because the discourse on foreign FFP, for those of you who have done some, reading in the past about it, or know about it, or have engaged in this topic, will know that it's not something that is, that I would say very new, relatively new for the global South, though. I think it's also an interesting time that when we are looking at the world today, the whole issue of rights, equity, inclusion, and diversity is becoming more and more critical and is actually acquiring some level of center stage beyond just the traditional, as they call, softer issues of development and equity, but even in the harder issues of national security, securitization, trade negotiation, and foreign policy. And I think it's from that lens that it is becoming very, very, I think it's becoming more and more important for us in the global South to also start looking at how do some of these issues that relate to foreign policy can be specifically addressed with a more gendered, more feminist lens. And I've said this before in past conversations in this platform and in others, that most of the time the use of the word feminist seems to create some kind of, let's say, apprehension in the minds of mainstream policymakers, less so in the minds of those of us who are in academics or think tank. But within the policy realm and policy domain in the global South, it's actually still a term which is perceived as something that's probably less socially attuned to our context, which unfortunately is not true. But that's generally a perception that people have as something that probably is more driven by a larger framing from the global north, and less grounded in the global south. However, I think what we would like to clarify is that the very construct of feminist and feminism has undergone a massive contextualization in this, with relation to the global south, and extensively so past the Beijing 1995 conference, the women's conference in Beijing in 1995. And that, I think, was the opening space where I think feminism was also debated, reviewed, structured to be more contextually relevant and to take into cognition the issues and challenges that the developing countries of the global south were facing. And that, of course, gave birth to a lot of other interesting interventions. The gender budget, as you would know, was one of those in those early days, which has now found a lot of traction across countries in the South. And I think that's to the credit of the developing country and the developing South, which today, since 1995, many of the developing South countries are today middle power countries and are either developed or on the verge of moving on to, a higher level of development. That it's to the credit that some of these concepts were tried, piloted, tested, and adapted in the mainstream of the development and the governance framework of southern countries. Gender budget being one, and I think you will see that gender budget is something which is there in India, in Nepal, in Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Pakistan. Most of the southern countries, including countries in Southeast Asia, did adopt gender budget and made it their own, keeping in mind what they could and couldn't do. So I think now it's becoming probably the right time to push the envelope a little harder and say, all right, we are really now coming to a phase of overall cyclic uh, developmental and geopolitical process where I think countries are seeming, or probably are, a bit more polarized in their approach to many issues. Of late, we have seen countries which have been, we are seeing conflict all around us. They've been growing since the last 10 years. But we are also seeing countries which are also looking more to say, wait a minute, I think we need to start looking at what is in the national interest of our own country. Which on the face of it is not necessarily bad, but on certain things, I think while the national interest is critical, it's important to keep in mind that the world is defined by a collective interest and the collective good that we all need to be a part of. You can't be insular in the global world today. Therefore, while the national issues and national interests are critical, it's important to see how they align with the larger issues of what is globally most impactful, most effective, one that will create a larger global progress and profitability with an equitable lens, with an inclusive lens. And that's where I think this entire discussion on feminist foreign policy has much more bearing and much more weight to provide today than it has in the past. What does that mean? I think to me, that basically means that when countries engage with one another today to discuss conflict, either within those countries or in third country, I think the lens with which you need to look at whether those conflicts, how those conflicts need to be addressed and resolved is beyond just the traditional, framework of the more powerful or the less powerful, the more correct or the less correct. I think it has to be looked with the lens of, are the discussions and decisions we are taking collectively in the global world order going to create more inequity and more exclusion? Or are those discussions and decisions that we are trying to take going to create a framework for better inclusion so that we can avoid such conflicts in the future, moving forward for the next generation? And I think that inclusive lens is something which feminism has much, much intensively and clearly defined, given that women had to fight this battle of inequity generationally, hundreds and hundreds of years ago, and are still fighting. It's not surprising that the feminist discourse has defined that lens of inclusion and inequity better than any other lens that you would want to use, which is why it becomes imperative to really look at much of our global discourse, whether it's related to conflict, whether it is related to disaster and climate, which is the big thing today, and trade. Are those being negotiated, discussed, decided upon with a lens that will ensure that it undermines inequity and actually works towards promoting more equity and inclusion, both within your national boundaries, but also outside your national boundaries as you interact with other nations and countries? And I think that has become the moral responsibility of almost every country, big or small. And so therefore, for the Asia Foundation, I think unpacking what is a feminist foreign policy means is going to be a critical journey that we would like to embark on through this fellowship, through this process. There really isn't, I wouldn't say that there is one single framework that we are looking to go by. We are saying, if you can just keep at the heart and center of anything and everything that you do in relation to foreign relation, participation, collaboration, governance, if you can keep equity, inclusion, and rights at the center of it, I think we are going to be doing better than we are now. And I think that's the discourse we hope to move with the Feminist Foreign Policy Fellowship, using the lens that the feminist movement has created, the framework of identifying equity and inequity, this intersectionality of equity. These are all things that we have actually long been discussing, talking, refining, and I'm sure Dr. Stephenie Foster will talk about it in her speech as well when she gives her talk, how these can and actually should become tools for overarching tools for international cooperation and foreign policy, I feel. And I think that's the idea, and that's why this fellowship is important. We are looking to hear from many young scholars, young researchers who probably have fresher ideas, more to add to this conversation and debate, so that we can improve our own discourse as we go forward. So with that, I'd like to wish all the fellows who have joined the very best. This is going to be an exciting fellowship for you, because the lineup of those who are speaking are just some amazing people, phenomenal people with a whole lot of wealth and knowledge, and also a deep-rooted commitment amongst all that are in the list, a deep-rooted commitment to equity and inclusion. I think there's a lot you can take back, and I'm really excited and hoping that we can come out with amazing papers from this, which I think the foundation would like to make a commitment that, given the quality of the paper and the process through which they have been written being at a certain level, we would definitely push for bringing it out as a mainstream book with any mainstream publisher, not just as a conference report or a conference compendium. We have already done that for our hydrodiplomacy, so we hope to do this with the feminist foreign policy as well. So with that, thank you all so much and all the best to you. And I am excited and I'll probably be listening in on a lot of the lectures going forward on this issue. Thank you so much. Namaste. Jai Hind.
Thank you, Nandita ma'am, for your insightful words. We truly appreciate your continued support and leadership in shaping this program. Next, I would like to invite Dr. Simi Mehta, CEO and Editorial Director of IMPRI, for her welcoming statement, where she will set the stage for this fellowship and emphasize the importance of feminist foreign policy in today's world.
Thank
Over
you
to
very
you.
much. Thank you very much, Meenu. And a very good evening to everyone. And I'm delighted to welcome all the distinguished experts and selected fellows to this 3-month immersive online introductory leadership certificate training program on feminist foreign policy. And I'm very thankful that Nandita ma'am has already set the fellowship program in motion through her eloquent introductory remarks. I'm really grateful to Nandita ma'am from the Asia Foundation for supporting IMPRI in spearheading this very important fellowship program. I am very proud to announce that this fellowship, which seeks to create sensitized global citizens who are deeply invested in fostering a just and inclusive world. We have received more than 1,100 applications from all around the world, out of which we have really carefully reviewed and selected around 60 of the applications. So to all the selected participants, I really extend my hearty congratulations. I'm also very thrilled to announce that we have a distinguished lineup of experts who will share their important insights on the concept, theory, and practice of feminist foreign policy. And I'm really grateful to the Asia Foundation team, my team at IMPRI, Professor Vibhuti Patel, all the distinguished resource persons who have joined us today and will be joining us in the next 3 months, and all the participants for actually joining hands and coming together to contribute to global conversations on how nations, especially those from the global south, as they have the patriarchal traditions, they can benefit from mainstreaming feminist foreign policy in their respective policies. So with this, I would like to end and I'd hand it back to Meenu, and I look forward to enriching experience for myself and for all the fellows. Thank you, and I welcome all of you. Back to you.
Thank you, Dr. Simi Mehta, for your thoughtful welcome and for reinforcing the critical role of this fellowship in global policy discourse. Now, I have the pleasure of inviting our chair for the fellowship, Professor Vibhuti Patel ji, visiting distinguished professor at IMPRI and former professor at Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Mumbai, to deliver her opening remarks and offer further insights into the goals and structure of the fellowship. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you. First of all, I would like to welcome all of you for this very important fellowship that and most of the universities, the most prestigious universities and colleges, not only of India, but Asia and other parts of the world have also responded. And see the kind of applications we got were from research scholars and journalists and college teachers, academicians, political activists, and women's rights activists. And I think that is a very important composition that we have for this. And first of all, I would like to offer my heartfelt thanks to Dr. Arjun Kumar, Dr. Simi Mehta, all the experts, and co-organizer, Ms. Nandita Baruah, Ms. Apurva Singh, and whole IMPRI team. For last 6 weeks, they have been working round the clock, and so many experts who are going to enlighten us. I think they also deserve heartfelt thanks. And I welcome today's expert, Ms. Stephenie Foster. And the introductory remark by Ms. Nandita Baruah has already set the tone for the geopolitical environment in which we are now discussing feminist foreign policy. For me, a person like me who has been in the women's movement right from the early 70s, for us, the whole interest in feminist foreign policy came after 40 years of experiencing and providing transnational feminist solidarity. It was during the 80s, from 75 to 85, International Women's Decade, that we got opportunity to attend the regional conferences in Southeast Asia, East Asia, and South Asia, and also after the Nairobi conference in 85, end of the decade conference, and we came up with a common document, Nairobi Forward-Looking Strategy. And after that, we also had a very important debate on population and development, International Convention on Population and Development, where the northern countries were talking about population versus development. We feminists were saying it is a population and development, and it is very important to make investment in human resources. And so many economists, human development experts also were talking like that. It was structural adjustment program and stabilization policies and neoliberal globalization that also intensified exchange of ideas among the developing countries, and also those who believed in social justice, gender justice, environmental justice, and distributive justice. Even from the northern part of the world, we started talking about what kind of trade relations that we want to have. Is another world possible? Because with globalization, we also saw a movement of people and from one region to the other. So this exchange of ideas also became very important. And feminist foreign policy, it gained much deserved recognition as a result of the efforts of peacemaking, peace building, and peacekeeping, which women's organizations and the state also, whenever they sent women as women soldiers were sent to some of the African countries, there was a lot of admiration from the local community. It was a very important trust building exercise that we all had, as compared to when the men were sent, especially peacekeeping forces in Sri Lanka, which created tremendous chasm among the people of Jaffna and the Indian Army. So I think some of the important learnings that we have in providing this kind of solidarity is very important. And the question of representation of women in foreign policy decision-making and development assistance for empowerment of women, as well as placing gender and women's vulnerability on a transnational security agenda, is a topmost. Madam Nandita Baruah, she talked about gender-responsive budgeting, how to reduce the gender gap in the area of, most important, in the area of health and education and skill building and digital connectivity, and also political participation. That is also very important. And that is why I think the UNDP Human Development Report and the comparative cross-country analysis that also facilitated this kind of exchanges. Now, and we see that the currently world is polarized, whether it's a question of Palestine versus Israel, or Ukraine versus Russia, or the civil wars which are going on in several places. Sudan's report we are reading every day. So in this context, I think the younger generation is really interested. Why are we getting such a tremendous response from the younger generation of students who are in their 20s and 30s, that how to grapple with the page one news of the mainstream newspapers. So the rights and meanings of promotion of women's issues, including countering gender-based violence, which has become a very important concern in the post-pandemic world, the backlash of violence, the varied forms and intensity of violence, they are also quite puzzling. Representation is not only just inducting them into the decision-making body, but they need to have a voice. That is also very important. And third one is, are we allocating enough resources for this agenda of gender equity? So I think time is ripe for the instituting feminist foreign policy in all developing countries and also in India, though the states in Asia, they are only talking of gender equality, but they have a certain reservation about the word feminist, no, because of the misconception about the word feminist and gender, which is so neutral and a political term that is acceptable to the state. But the women's movement is insisting that we need, if we want to change the unequal power relation, feminist foreign policy is very important. So distancing itself from the simple rhetoric, such as foreign policy, would be strategic and would be critical to nations' broader foreign policy objectives, including economic development, prosperity, peace, and security. That is what the mainstream politicians are talking about. But let us not forget the legacy that we are holding. It was Dr. Hansa Mehta, who, when she attended United Nations General Assembly way back in 1948, she's the one who stood up in the General Assembly, and said that we need to talk about the human rights, where all world leaders were talking only about the Universal Declaration of Men's Rights. She's the one who stood up and said that we can't leave out 50% of world's population. And she's the statement which was there, that all men are born free and equal. She fiercely advocated that all human beings are born free and equal. So I think this is the legacy with which we talk about the feminist foreign policy. And I'm sure that this whole exercise, this fellowship program, is going to have a very, very inspiring results. It will generate hope in the midst of hopelessness, which the war and destruction and loss of human lives, and seeing those very, very heartbreaking images of children suffering. I think we will be able to get some hope that we can collectively put our minds together and come up with an idea or a pathway to more humane and gender equal society. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Vibhuti Patelji, for setting the stage for what promises to be an enlightening journey into the world of feminist foreign policy, and also for sharing valuable insights from your experience regarding the legacy and evolution of women's movement. We now move on to the inaugural session, and I'm honored to introduce our first speaker, Ms. Stephenie Foster, partner at Smash Strategies and co-author of Feminist Foreign Policy in Theory and Practice. Over to you, Ms. Foster.
Well, good evening. It's morning for me, so I will say good morning as well. And thank you all for being part of this. I really want to start by thanking IMPRI and the Asia Foundation, and congratulating those of you who were selected to be fellows, because obviously this was a really competitive process, and you are people who are on the front lines of how we continue to develop and define feminist foreign policy in years to come. And that's really where I'm going to start. And so I know we have some slides as well. If we could put those up just to help guide the conversation, that would be great. Okay, next slide, as we say. So as we start this conversation about feminist foreign policy, one of the key things I want to start off talking about is sort of what are the constructs, what are the things that are common across countries that have a feminist foreign policy and across advocates for feminist foreign policy. This is an exciting time in this field. The old structures and ways of thinking about foreign policy and the institutions that we all rely on, the UN, other multilateral bodies, bilateral conversations between countries. Some of these institutions and frameworks and structures have served us well, and some are a little bit in need of a refresh. The frameworks in particular, I think, have been developed over a period of time, whereas several of the earlier speakers said, left out really a focus on half of the population. And so as we look at feminist foreign policy, this really emerging trend and emerging paradigm, it's important to think about what does it look like today, but also what can it look like into the future. And that's how all of you are so critical for this conversation. We're going to come back to a little bit of country specific discussion in this presentation. But I want to say, as my co-author Susan Markham and I wrote this book, which I'll hold up, Feminist Foreign Policy in Theory and Practice, we realized that one of the challenges in this conversation was that there was really no one definition of feminist foreign policy. I would also say that's one of the exciting things about feminist foreign policy, is it's a field where there is so much ability to shape what this means in a country specific way, to shape what it means contextually. And as we'll see in this conversation as well, feminist foreign policy looks different in Sweden or Norway than it does in Colombia or Libya or Nepal. So there are different ways that countries and governments and civil society in countries have taken this concept and made it their own and relevant to their context. But I think we've seen across the countries that have developed either a feminist foreign policy, a feminist development policy, or a feminist trade policy, that there are these four fundamental concepts that really cut across all of these policy frameworks. So I'm going to talk a little bit about these four constructs because I think for a couple of reasons. This is what we see as a baseline, but these concepts for me also help me think about feminist foreign policy in a much more broad way. So it's not just about how feminist foreign policy is developed and implemented in one place. It's really about this concept and how each group of actors, whether it be government, civil society, or academia, see themselves in sort of pushing forward this very exciting discourse. So the first one is gender equality is both a goal and a strategy of foreign policy. What does that mean? What that means is that we know there, as research has shown us, that countries that are more gender equal tend to, of course, be more prosperous. They're more secure. The higher levels of gender equality in a country correlate to things like, more engagement globally, less countries being less the aggressors in conflict, countries being really good global citizens. So gender equality drives outcomes. And it's important in these feminist foreign policy frameworks that gender equality is both a strategy, it's something that gets employed to really drive better outcomes, but it in and of itself is a goal. The second thing, and this has really been alluded to in the earlier conversations, and I think is very, very important, is that feminist foreign development or trade policies really broaden the definition of security. Security has been defined in many places, in many contexts, as really a militarized version of security. We're secure in societies. We evaluate security based on, sort of a militarized view of that. It's something that obviously is important, and I'm not saying that security in terms of personal security or safety is unimportant, but in the foreign policy realm, there are other things that are important for countries as they've defined security: food security, health security, understanding that as refugees and internally displaced people move, there are security issues that come from that, climate insecurity. These foreign policy frameworks that are emerging around feminist foreign policy really understand and try to take into account this broadened definition of security. This also has been part of the UN conversations in the last 20 to 30 years. And so this isn't really a new concept, but it's bringing this in again and saying, as we develop these new policies, we need to be mindful of what real people out there are really experiencing, that we need to see security through the lens of what's happening on the ground, not just through the lens of how militaries talk to each other or through the lens of how non-state actors engage with militaries around the world. So broadening the definition of security, really seeing this as human security and looking to that as part of the way that these feminist foreign policies engage and address the world. The third is the elevation of diverse voices. Now, often, if I'm asked by someone, what is a feminist foreign policy? And I ask them back, what do you think it is? Many, many people will say it's about having more women in high-level diplomatic and national security positions. And that's true. So this elevation of diverse voices kind of gets to how people sometimes intuitively think of feminist foreign policy. But that alone is not the only way we think about diverse voices. Yes, each of these countries has really committed to increasing the number of women and other marginalized groups, members of other marginalized groups in leadership positions in foreign policy, national security, trade, all of the things that are critically important. But at the same time, really looking to ensure that the voices of those who are impacted by foreign policy and national security decisions are brought into the process. And what does that mean? Ensuring that civil society groups, women's groups, groups that represent people on the ground who are going to be affected by these foreign policy and national security decisions, ensuring that they have a way, that there's a platform or a channel for them to really make their views known as countries are developing their foreign policy and national security goals and strategies. I think this, by the way, is a challenge, and we can talk about that later, because it's one thing to allow, that those voices into the conversation. It's another thing to really ensure that those voices are heard and that they have an impact. The fourth that we see throughout all of these foreign policy frameworks that are emerging is the desire to address historic power imbalances. And we've talked a little bit about this in terms of the other speakers who spoke before me. Those power imbalances are multiple. One is, of course, looking at how funds are spent. We know that resources are really a reflection of policy. How a country decides to spend money reflects really what its priorities are. And so looking to address the historic power imbalances between defense spending and diplomacy and development. That's certainly true in the US. Those issues are very big. We don't have a feminist foreign policy in the US, but this issue still comes up quite a bit. It's also looking at how, again, foreign policy implementers, countries, multilateral institutions, how their power, the power imbalance with those who are impacted can be addressed, and also addressing systemic issues such as patriarchy. We've talked a little bit about that, racism, things that have really historically affected these institutions that are, critically important in the world, but haven't always been developed and run with an eye to the broader group of people who live in the world. And that's a really important thing to think about. How do we try to change these institutions and systems so that they are much more reflective? So these are the four big fundamental concepts that the countries that have a feminist foreign policy all have. We will come back to this later, but just to say every country is different. And there are some countries that focus on pacifism. Well, one country that has focused on pacifism as part of its feminist foreign policy. There are others that have focused on other sort of concepts. But these are the core things that we see across all of these countries that have developed a feminist foreign policy or are in the process. So let's go to the next slide. So I think the important thing is to really talk about next, how did we get here? Because, people often say, oh my gosh, feminist foreign policy, where did it come from? The first country that had a feminist foreign policy was Sweden in the year 2014. And there's this sense that some people have that this just sort of came out of nowhere, which is not the case. And I think, again, this has been alluded to in the earlier conversations. Feminist foreign policy has many, many layers of foundations underneath it. And really critical, I think, to think about that, because, again, these foundations help us understand what feminist foreign policy is trying to accomplish. So what are the foundations? There are things like the concepts around human rights, around women's rights, around really expanding the way we see the world and expanding the rights that people have and the responsibilities that governments have towards individuals. This also comes out of peace movements. I'm going to talk a little bit more in a minute about the Women, Peace, and Security agenda and how that has been a foundation of feminist foreign policy. But it certainly is something that is really, really critical. A lot of it comes out of all the amazing and work that's been done over the last, 50 to 70 years, developing these key international agreements around women's rights. All of the UN conferences on women, all of the UN conferences on population and development and security. I mean, one particular set of, agreements that we all point to when we look at feminist foreign policy is the Beijing Conference in 1994, that is very seminal, but there were many, many conferences that led up to that. Of course, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, or CEDAW, very foundational. All of this work that's been done by women, by men, by gender equality advocates across the globe has been very foundational to feminist foreign policy. All of the feminist movements, all of this work has really brought us to this point where we see that there is, in my mind, an interesting point where a lot of the work that gets done on gender equality and feminism has been done at a domestic level, right? It's about what's going on in your country. But feminist foreign policy, as well as this work before it, really pulls that out and makes us say, what are the connections between the work that's done at the domestic level to address gender equality and move women forward? How does that connect to what's going on internationally? And I think that's a really important point, because for sure, what happens domestically in a country really affects its ability to be an advocate internationally for issues. I'm an American, so I will say that our domestic policy is our foreign policy, and we get judged, as Americans, as the U.S. government, when we go abroad and ask other countries to participate in, either work towards gender equality or other kinds of equality, and people can look at who we are as Americans and sometimes say, you're not exactly doing the same thing at home. And so this is a way for also there to be more of a connection between domestic policy and foreign policy. Now, before I go to the next slide, I do want to address, and this is probably a really good point, this whole concept of the word feminism that has been alluded to again by the earlier speakers. When Susan and I were writing this book, and also we had written several papers beforehand, we really are cognizant and struggle with the fact that this word feminism can really be off-putting to some people. When Sweden developed the first feminist foreign policy in 2014, Margot Wallström, who is the originator of this feminist foreign policy, was very clear that she used the word feminism because it was a little bit more edgy, that it did kind of challenge people to take the next step beyond gender equality. And we know that for some people, this word is, again, very challenging. I'm looking at my phone because I'm going to read the dictionary definition of feminism, which I just looked up. And it is that feminism is the belief in social, economic, and political equality between men and women. That's the dictionary definition. Feminism, like gender, sometimes has taken on more baggage that people ascribe or attribute to the word. To me, feminism is a very simple concept. It's about the social, economic, and political equality of the sexes, as this definition says. So I think maybe understanding and pushing back on that helps us a little bit with that word. We did think, as we were writing the book, about whether or not there was some other word we could use to describe this gender-focused feminist foreign policy, but we came to understand that really it was too many words, and also we don't want to run away from the idea that foreign policy needs to address the social, economic, and political equality between men and women. So it is a word that can have baggage, but it's certainly a word that also, I think, often gets misconstrued. All right, so let's go on to the next slide. I mean, as I mentioned, oh, well, we'll go to this one and then we'll come to women, peace, and security in a minute. But right now, Sweden was the first country to adopt a feminist foreign policy. And we have at least 10 others as of 2023. Now, as of 2024, there are about 16 countries that have adopted a feminist foreign policy. I mean, I think it's important to note that this is an inherently political issue. While Sweden did have the world's first feminist foreign policy in 2014, it was rescinded in 2022 by a conservative government that came into power. Now, what does that mean? It's interesting that when that foreign minister had his first press conference in 2022, the first two things he said that he was going to do, based on the mandate of the party that had won the election in Sweden, was send more money to Ukraine and rescind a feminist foreign policy. He was also said at the same time that Sweden would continue to have a foreign policy that was focused on gender equality, but he really rejected the use of the word feminism, which goes back to what we just talked about. So I think the jury is out on the impact of that change on Sweden's foreign policy. There is and have been a couple of studies that have been done by an independent set of academics in Sweden about the impact of the 8 years of Sweden's feminist foreign policy and what we see going forward. So we can talk a little bit about that later. Okay, let's go to the next slide. And so here for the women, peace, and security framework that I talked about, this is really a critical foundation of feminist foreign policy. Some would argue it's the most. I think it's one of the most important. I don't think it's the most important. But as many of you know, in the year 2000, the UN Security Council adopted Resolution 1325, which and then adopted over time 9 successor resolutions, really addressing all of the issues that we talk about when it comes to women, peace, and security. The importance of women's participation in peace and security in terms of as negotiators, as participants in peace kind of conversations outside the formal framework, in the security sector, all of those critical things. Protection of women, children, and others, men as well, who are the victims of sexual violence and conflict, preventing conflict, and ensuring there's adequate relief and recovery. All of these things are embedded in the Women, Peace, and Security framework. When Susan and I were writing this book, or the first papers actually, it was quite interesting. We had been working within the US government on women, peace, and security before we started our firm and started writing. And we assumed, never assumed, that the people who worked on women, peace, and security were also the same people who would be working on feminist foreign policy. And we were wrong. When we did a mapping exercise, we went and spoke to a lot of people in the sort of international women's community, and mostly in the US, we saw there was very little overlap. I think there's a little more overlap now, but I think there, women, peace, and security gets us to a certain point. And there is a criticism that this framework reinforces gender norms of women as victims or as inherently peaceful. There are also sort of criticisms from the other side that the women, peace, and security agenda disproportionately focuses on women in the security sector and increasing the number of women there. So this framework takes us very far, but I think feminist foreign policy, again, tries to broaden that out and really look at how we broaden the definition of security. So we're looking at all these other emerging issues, again, whether it's food security, health security, climate insecurity, and bringing us to a point where this framework of the women, peace, and security agenda can really kind of go to the next level. But this is certainly a key foundation for all of the work that's being discussed in feminist foreign policy. So let's go next. And I think I want to talk about, for any country that is putting together and thinking about a feminist foreign policy, and for civil society that's advocating for feminist foreign policy, there are really several things that are critically important. One is that there's really strong political will and leadership commitment. What we've seen in the countries that have a feminist foreign policy, again, whether that's Sweden, Mexico, Colombia, all the countries that are really Canada, well, any of them, it often really comes from the top. We see that countries that have established and are implementing a feminist foreign policy often talked about it in their political campaigns in terms of what the commitments are by political parties as they are striving to be elected to office. For example, in the United Kingdom, they just had an election, as you probably know, and the Labour Party won. In the document that was put together right before the election by David Lammy, who's now the Foreign Secretary in Britain, about what a Labour Party foreign policy would look like, he did mention that the Labour Party was going to promulgate a feminist development policy. So looking at the way that the UK spends their development assistance, that they were going to really look at it in a feminist way. Now, that's a statement. And then the key is how much commitment is there to that statement. And I think we're going to see in Britain how that works out. But it certainly is also something that gives civil society in countries something to look at and use to continue to advocate for a feminist foreign policy, or in that case, a feminist development policy. So key is this political will. I mean, unlike, I would say, the Women, Peace, and Security agenda, which, and a lot of the other work around the Beijing platform and CEDAW, where a lot of that really was grassroots activism that kind of bubbled up. In a lot of ways, feminist foreign policy has kind of, there is work at the grassroots, but the countries that have feminist foreign policies also have kind of a top-down kind of approach to it. There's a political party, there's a leader who really is engaged and committed. And so these countries have been able to put in place an effective, at least relatively speaking, feminist foreign policy. Also key is a commitment to structural and institutional change. Hard, how do you change these institutions? What do you put in place? And we can talk a little bit about that. What does that mean? A lot of that is around things like gender analysis. How do you ensure that you have a focus on gender throughout your foreign policy decision making? Certainly in the United States, I'm going to use an example, but this I think is relevant anywhere. In the United States, the president of the United States every day gets something called a president's daily brief, which is really a brief on what's going on around the world with all the conflicts and other things that are happening. And we think it would be great if that daily brief had a gender analysis for every issue. Does that immediately change things? Probably not. But starting to build in this idea that for every decision that gets made in these major institutions, foreign ministries, defense ministries, trade ministries, that there has to be a focus on women. There has to be a focus on the gender impact of decisions, because otherwise these decisions just get made and people assume wrongly that women are equally impacted by a decision. Similarly, ensuring that in every kind of development arena, we're collecting sex disaggregated data. How does this development program or policy affect men, women, boys, girls differently? Very important. These are things that can help change the institutions, ensuring there are gender advisors in every part of an entity and that they have real power. Those are the things that are some ideas about structural and institutional change that are really important. Increased representation of women across government, not just women. I should change that slide because, not every woman is a feminist and not every feminist is a woman. And so while representation is important in and of itself to reflect that women and men are equally able to do any job, it really is about ensuring that these feminist voices are brought in and that we're really looking at the ability for them to have an impact, and not just feminist voices not just saying we need women in the development sector or feminists in the development sector, but in hardcore, national security and foreign policy. And lastly, resources. As I said at the beginning, money matters, and I know we mentioned gender budgeting earlier, but ensuring that there are adequate resources to do all of these things. It's really important to do that. Otherwise, it's easier to say you have a feminist foreign policy and not really be able to implement that. Okay, next. So just a few things, and then I'm going to stop and answer questions. We see that there are new countries all the time announcing support for feminist foreign policy. Colombia, as I mentioned, established a feminist foreign policy last year. It's the first country ever and the only to date that says that its feminist foreign policy is pacifist. Interesting, being that they had a long time essentially civil war with the FARC, which is still they've had a lot of still simmering disputes with non-state actors in their country, and have been, I think, are perceived of and have been a place where there is a fair amount of state-sponsored and non-state sponsored violence. But in this new government, which was elected, established a feminist foreign policy and has said that its foreign policy is pacifist. That's in contrast to other countries that have a feminist foreign policy, countries like Germany and others that are very clear that they see, for example, their support for Ukraine in the conflict with Russia as being part and parcel of their feminist foreign policy. Also, interestingly, some of the countries that have established a feminist foreign policy are really talking about care issues, addressing the issues around the disproportionate impact on time and resources, the care burden on women, and trying to weave that into their feminist foreign policy. Also very, interesting and important. Secondly, and I think this conversation is part of it, this ongoing effort to really, what is a feminist foreign policy? There's so much about, about this that's, again, exciting, but sometimes a little bit frustrating to people because people want one definition and we really don't have one. We see the commonalities, of course, the four things that I talked about. Civil society is starting to talk about feminist foreign policy in terms of peace, people, planet, and peace, which is another way to think about what the commonalities are. But I think it's important really to understand that this is really an emerging and exciting set of issues for you all to be participating in. And then lastly, to know that at these global levels, at the United Nations General Assembly and others, there are groupings of governments that are coming together to talk about feminist approaches to foreign policy. They may not say they have a feminist foreign policy, but they have a feminist approach to foreign policy. Again, this is, I think, grappling a little bit with the concept and also with the name. I do think this is a good point to say one really important thing. There are countries that say they have a feminist foreign policy and may not do much more than that. They just say they have one. There are countries that say they have a feminist, again, foreign trade or development policy, and are actually taking steps to try to change their frameworks, to try to embed gender analysis, to try to do all these things we're talking about. And then there are countries that don't use the moniker feminist foreign policy and are doing a lot of the same things. So it's important, I think, for all of us to be very clear-minded that a country saying it has a feminist foreign policy is important, but it's also important to look at what a country's actually doing. Just to close on the sort of a US example, we don't have a feminist foreign policy, but we have a civil society group, a set of groups, a coalition that grades or puts forward a report card on how the US is doing on a set of indicators that go to the issues that this coalition would like the US to have in place to have a feminist foreign policy. And it grades the US every couple of years. And so right now, that coalition has said that the US is doing 50% of what it would have expected the US to do to sort of achieve having a feminist foreign policy. So I mean, I think in a lot of countries, there are civil society groups that are doing the same thing. They're sort of pushing and grading, coming up with a set of goals and a set of programs and a set of frameworks that they would like their country to really sign on to or do in the furtherance of a feminist foreign policy. And so that's a really important thing for us to think about, is how countries not only are establishing these policies, but how civil society can push to ensure that countries are looking at a really broad set of ways that they can make structural change, make systemic change, and also be held accountable. Okay, so I think that is, for now, I'm going to stop with that. And I think we can get rid of this. That's my book. We can get rid of the slides, and then I'm happy to answer any questions. I am very mindful that this is a really broad set of issues, and there's so much embedded in it. And I hope that for this first, half an hour, I gave you an overview of sort of the broad picture. What do countries with a feminist foreign policy have in common? Where did this come from? It didn't just come out of thin air. How are countries looking at this in a way to be effective? What can increase effectiveness? And the fact that I would leave you with before, again, we open it to questions, that this is something that started in Sweden. And the first few countries that had a feminist foreign policy besides Sweden, were Norway, and we had France and Germany. But this is really a concept that is spread now. And I think this is why this conversation is so important. This isn't just something that's relevant to one set of countries or another. It's relevant everywhere for all the reasons that were laid out at the beginning. And it's also, though, incumbent upon all of us, no matter where we live, to figure out how this set of concepts works best where we are, and how we can best think about advocating for feminist foreign policy vis-a-vis our own governments, or broader, multilateral institutions in the context in which we all live. And so I look forward to talking with you guys and answering questions, hearing any concerns you have, but also sort of following this for years to come to see where this set of really important policy frameworks leads us. So thank you, and happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Ms. Foster, for your powerful and thought-provoking session. We deeply appreciate your time and insights. I now invite Professor Vibhuti Patel to share her comments and insights on the topic. Over to you, ma'am.
Yeah. Yes, Ms. Stephenie Foster, your very, very engaging lecture and very clear in terms of demystifying the concepts of feminist foreign policy. I think you spoke very well. We in the Global South have seen feminist foreign policy, which provides a platform for a powerful and also powerful lens through which we can address global systems of power such as patriarchy, racism, cultural nationalism, imperialism, and militarism that leave majority of population in a perpetual states of vulnerability and despair. So to put the promotion of gender equality and women's rights at the center of nation's diplomatic agenda, I think that is the important mission that we in the Global South have. I would like to know your vision of decolonial feminist future.
Mine? Okay.
Mm.
I mean, I would just say the following. I think, first of all, I think this set of institutions and frameworks we've had for many years, right? And I say this as an American, post the Second World War, this set of institutions really developed. I mean, there was a lot of input from people around the world, but, you know, thinking about the role of the United States in developing the UN, the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, all these institutions that have kind of guided the way the world has worked. Number one, when they, and I say this, I say it with all due respect to all the people I really respect, but these institutions were developed by a group of pretty much white guys, right? As we say in the US, pale, male, and Yale. Yale being a very important, you know, educational institution here. And so they were developed in their worldview, right? How they saw the ability to establish a more secure and peaceful world after a major world war. The world has changed. The world is different. There's so many things that we face now that, you know, weren't really in the mindset of those people, right? Non-state actors, climate change, huge migration flows, food insecurity. Not that those things, some of those things didn't exist, but I mean, these are now things that we talk about all the time and are really impacting our world. And so I think feminist foreign policy is a way to try to right-size that and say, these institutions, some people would say have served us well. Some people would say they haven't served us well at all. But wherever you are on that continuum of the debate, they need to change. They need to be modernized. They need to take into account what's going on in the world today and how people are interacting with each other, absorbing information, and sort of the globalization of that we see, right? We know more about what's going on in the world because we see it on our screens, on our, you know, on TV. We read it in the paper, if anyone still reads a paper. I do, but very few people. So to me, this whole conversation about feminist foreign policy is about changing that, is about saying, how do we take in the fact that these institutions weren't developed with a lot of input. Let's just put it that way. From many people. I mean, not even, if you think about it, it was a very small group of people. So we need that. We need to ensure that, and this goes to your point about how do we bring in more voices? I think we need to ensure that we're not only bringing in voices, but we're listening to them. Because it's one thing, or, you know, that we're actually acting on it. I mean, you can listen to someone and not act on what they say. So how do we develop that? And how do we ensure that, you know, these institutions have the ability to do that? So I think it's a complicated set of issues around how we can change these institutions so that they are more reflective, so that people from around the world who are impacted by decisions have the ability to be part of the decision-making process. And also that we're thinking about that in a more global way, which goes to how do we ask our decision makers to make decisions? What do we push them to look at as they're making decisions? And I think that's critically important.
Thank you, Ms. Foster. Next, we move on to Ms. Nandita Baruah to share her comments and insights. Nandita, ma'am, over to you.
You know, I think her connection got lost, so she's not
Yeah.
in it.
So I
Or
think
she's on
Dr.
mute.
Yeah, there are 4 questions, and also Dr. Professor Janki and Daria has written in the chat box. You can unmute and speak now. You announce me, no? Announce the names of.
Sure. So we have a few questions by Mohammed Shafiq Sultan. Hello, Ms. Foster. Why the feminist foreign policy is not applicable in those countries which are permanent members of UNSC, namely the US? Is the first question.
Okay, why don't we, okay. Was the question, why is it not applicable to what?
US.
Why is it permanent
Oh,
members
okay.
of the UNSC?
Well, let me say, I didn't say it wasn't applicable. I just said we don't have one, right? There are 16 to 18 countries that have either a feminist foreign trade or development policy. So it's not that it isn't applicable in the US, it's that we don't have one. And it goes to the whole issue of what does, sort of how do countries push towards that? We have civil society, as I said, coalition advocating for a feminist foreign policy in the US. And, I would say that in the Biden administration, there have been policies implemented that, as I said, this coalition would say that about half of the things they think are important to have a feminist foreign policy have been implemented. So it's not that it's not applicable, it's that we don't have one. The countries that have them, are obviously a subset of the world, but it's growing. And I think it's interesting that it is moving from sort of the Sweden, kind of throughout the globe. But certainly, hopefully, at some point, the US will have a feminist foreign policy. It's certainly applicable here. I think it would have a large impact on the way that the US conducts its foreign policy, but we're not there yet.
Then there is another question by Muskan Khanna. Also, we have Professor Anuradha M. Chenoy. You recognize, ma'am. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you for this very broad analysis that you have put forward very well in terms of the way you see a feminist foreign policy, in terms of how it was framed, in terms of representation, resources, and rights. Now, when you actually, how would you place it in the real politic of a foreign policy? How would feminism come into, let's say, national interests of a state which might want to say that they would like to have they might have a nuclear war? How could a feminist foreign policy actually attend to those real issues of not peace in the planet, but what states are interested in, and that is war and domination and preserving asymmetries very often? Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, that is the question, isn't it? Because I think we see that look, the world is a complicated place. And also countries are complicated. Countries do several things at the same time that aren't always consistent. That's true everywhere. I mean, I don't think there's one country that has a totally consistent policy framework. So that's a huge issue. And I think, one kind of glaring example of that, which doesn't quite get to your issue, but I think it's illustrative, is when Margot Wallström was, in the midst of implementing this feminist foreign policy in Sweden, she stopped Swedish arms sales to Saudi Arabia. Now, people may not know this, Sweden is actually a fairly large arms exporter. And she did that based on Saudi Arabia's record on human rights and women's rights. Now, by the way, just spoiler alert, that retraction of arms sales did not last long. And that was because that created a huge issue in the bilateral relations between Saudi Arabia and Sweden. And, there's been a lot written about this. So this is not anything that is not in the public domain, but other, corporate entities, other government officials kind of went into this middle of this conversation And anyway, Swedish arms sales did start up again. Now, and at the same time, Margot Wallström was disinvited from, numerous forums, not just in Saudi Arabia, but in the Middle East for that decision. So these decisions are complicated, right? I mean, these frameworks, they give you opportunities to do things. They're not dispositive. They're also, and this is, as I'm talking about this, a lot of this is I'm trying to kind of capture what's gone on in the world. I would say also feminist foreign policy is not a panacea. It gives us another set of tools, but in and of itself, a country adopting or saying it has a feminist foreign policy doesn't solve all the problems. It gives us another set of tools to move us forward in a very complex world. So I understand my answer is probably not really answering your question, but I think it's enough sort of suffice it for me to say that I think these are the questions. And I mean, I've had a lot of discussions about this because with my co-author, because, for example, if we were to say in the US that every decision-making body that's looking at foreign policy and national security decisions made by the United States government, say in every one of those conversations, there had to be a gender analysis. Okay, what happens if there's a gender analysis and the same decision gets made? And it's, the same that would have gotten made without a gender analysis. We still decide to, go to war or do something, engage in a conflict. Is that progress? And I think the question then becomes, do we expect that the first time there's a gender analysis, it's going to make a difference? Or do we look at kind of down the road that if we continue to have a gender analysis at every step of the way and strong political leadership, that it eventually will shift these institutions? That's another conversation. Like, what are our collective expectations about what a feminist foreign policy can do in terms of impact? And I think those are very, very important questions. And I don't have an answer, but I can see there are ways to push this forward. And I also understand that, I'm looking at this from a global perspective, but also understanding what's going on in the US and how the US plays an outsized role in the world.
Moving on to the next question. So there was a question of how. Yeah.
This is Janki Andharia. May I?
Yeah. Sure, ma'am.
I think what you just mentioned actually begs the question of authenticity. There's too much of jingoism that we are quick to sort of create a bandwagon, hop onto it, do training programs and so on. But I think there's a need for us to very clearly lay out an agenda which says that feminist foreign policy is pro-demilitarization. Are we bold enough to even say that? I think this whole, kind of, in order for us to even survive, I mean, maybe an organization such as yours or any other NGO, we have to be politically correct. And I think that is what actually creates a complete absence of authenticity. And we use terminology and we use words without really making a difference to the real world. And I think I have a problem with that because like Vibhuti, I've been associated with the feminist movement since the 80s. And there's something called authentic posturing and articulation, action, as against, okay, you say something because it's fashionable to say so. So I think unless, I mean, this is just a viewpoint, unless there's clarity and through our collective conversation, we are able to say that this is what the agenda of feminist foreign policy would look like, I think we are just sort of beating around the bush and being bully about something. I'm just being also the devil's advocate, and you'll probably see more of this while I'm on this fellowship. But I think we need to push the envelope a little bit to learn from our past mistakes. I mean, to what extent is the UN effective? Yes, it is true that the US is one of the biggest votaries and funders of the UN system, but that's part of the problem. So I think we really need to look at, as Professor Chinoy was saying, the real politic, what goes on into diplomacy, and to ensure that there is structural change internally within a country does not necessarily impact foreign policy. So I think what kind of voices do citizens have in shaping foreign policy, I think is also a little bit of a long shot, especially in large democracies in the country. Sweden, of course, is an exception for a variety of reasons, but in large countries, I think we need to really look at what's happening in the real world. So thank you.
I mean, I'll just say a couple things. Colombia obviously has said that its feminist foreign policy is pacifist and has said that it believes that every country that has a feminist foreign policy should also be pacifist. That is not the case. I mean, these other countries have not said that. And if you look at their actions, they would argue that's not how they see their feminist foreign policy. So I don't disagree with you that authenticity is important for sure. I think, and this is sort of from my perspective, having worked in the State Department and I worked at the embassy in Afghanistan for about 1.5 years in the middle of the 2000s, and working at the State Department, going back, working on Afghan relocation after the fact, being in the Global Women's Issues Office. I think, institutions are large and complicated. And I think civil society and academia in particular play critical roles in sort of pushing forward institutional change. And I would actually say in the US, citizens have a huge impact on foreign policy because who we vote for president really affects our foreign policy. And that is certainly something that's, we're talking about right now in the US. But I would also say in terms of the role of diplomats, and I didn't talk about this in the presentation, but I think it's critically important. Another way that we can ensure that there's structural and institutional change is developing clear guidelines for diplomats, development officials, et cetera, as they go out around the world in terms of who they're supposed to talk to. So you're not just asking diplomats to talk to the elite government officials and business community, but how you ensure that they're talking to women's groups and civil society groups. And Secretary Clinton was very critical in that regard, where she really pushed line diplomats across the globe to go out and ensure that they were meeting with civil society and women's groups, and to ensure that as she traveled, that those meetings were always on her agenda. So does that in and of itself change foreign policy immediately? No. I think it does go to this, and it is a very, very, I think, real live discussion, like how do you change these institutions? Because they're very institutional, right? They've been around a long time, no matter what country you're in, and how you change the way they work. Do you change it gradually? Do you try to change it more rapidly? I mean, I think it's a very open debate, and very important. And I think actually you sort of have to try to do both at the same time for there to be real opportunities for change and impact.
Thank you. I see one more raised hand from Shobana Karthikeyan. Ma'am, if you could speak if you could switch on your video and raise your question and also introduce yourself.
You're still on mute if you're trying to talk. No?
Then let's move on to the next question. There are a bunch of them. Yeah. Has any African countries adopted or considered adopting a feminist foreign policy? And on a related note, there was also questions regarding operationalizing feminist foreign policy in Asian countries.
Okay. Let me just in terms of Africa, I mean, there's been interest in the African Union, which, as you all know, is a regional body, to really start talking about a feminist foreign policy there. No country, well, am I wrong? Liberia has talked about it a little bit. Certainly they had a woman president, which again, not always dispositive. Libya has said it has a feminist foreign policy, but has done very little with that. So I think Africa is sort of starting the conversation, but hasn't really, no country has developed or established a feminist foreign policy there. I will say, before I go on to the Asia question, though this is relevant maybe for all of them, over the last 3 years, there have been 3 separate conferences, one each year, hosted by a country that has a feminist foreign policy. The first was in Germany, the second in the Netherlands, the third in Mexico, bringing together government officials and civil society from not just those countries, but from around the world. And I went to the one in the Netherlands, which was last year, and there were a lot of representatives from civil society in Africa at that conference. So having conversations with the civil society actors, you realize there's a lot of interest by civil society in feminist foreign policy and a lot of advocacy, but right now no country has really adopted a feminist foreign policy in Africa. In Asia, Nepal has talked about, and Mongolia have talked about feminist foreign policy. Nepal has sort of edged toward it. I've seen a couple of different articles. I'm not quite sure, maybe someone from Nepal is on and knows that answer, but I think those are places where there is movement towards a feminist foreign policy in Asia, certainly.
And then in the context of bringing diverse voices and broadening the definition of security, how do feminists theorize the concept of citizenship? This is by Aditi, ma'am.
In terms of
theorizing the concept, yes.
I mean, I'm not quite sure what you mean by that question, I guess.
Can you elaborate, Aditi? Can you unmute and speak?
Hello?
Yeah.
Am I audible?
Yeah, please give examples.
Yeah, good evening, ma'am. So,
Yeah.
since the earlier understanding of security has mainly been military oriented, where we see the concept of citizenship to be more of a very aggressive, military man, somebody who can serve the country by going into a war. Now, since we are bringing other aspects such as human security, food security, and different voices, or we are trying to accept the differences, whatever we have among the society, how do we now theorize the concept of citizenship under those terms?
I have to say, I don't know. I'm just thinking about the countries that have a feminist foreign policy. If I've seen that discussed, and I don't think I have. I mean, certainly there is certainly an issue as people move across boundaries, how does their citizenship or lack thereof in that country have an impact? But I don't know that I'm just thinking in my mind, I can't think of a country that's really necessarily addressed that. So I'm afraid I don't have a great answer on that.
Shobana, can you speak now? Hello, you have raised your hand.
Hello, ma'am.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, ma'am, there was some problem here. Ma'am, I wanted to talk about the
Introduce
linkages.
yourself. Yeah, introduce yourself.
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, I'm Dr. Shobhana Karthikeyan from the Department of Economics, Madras Christian College, Chennai, India. Ma'am, my question is on the linkages between the feminist thinking and international trade. So generally in an international trade class, we start off saying that international trade is the engine of growth and things like that. We conveniently overlook the feminist aspect of it, or the what it means to the women in general. So what it means to 50% of the population. So what are the linkages, ma'am? On the whole, is it possible to say whether international trade has benefited them, or it has put them in a much deplorable condition? Or are the experiences different from for countries in Asia or countries in Africa, or has it been the experience has been different?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. The idea of a feminist trade policy is sort of percolating up, and just a few countries have really looked at that. Another kind of overlay there is that Canada in particular has looked at gender, sort of gendering other trade agreements with various parts of trade agreements addressing issues around gender. I think this is a huge issue. And I'm going to say, again, this is one where people are just starting to talk about this, because certainly there are a lot of people who will say, are we really, as we look out across the globe, are we really understanding the impact of trade and globalization on real people, right? On women, on people of different economic strata, and how do we ensure that we aren't sort of continuing to have structures in place that are not good for people? So that is why I think very important, as this trade discussion emerges, that there are gender conversations, and that people are looking and really seriously doing a gender analysis, looking at the data around what is the real impact in a particular country across that sector or across that trade agreement, as those agreements are being negotiated and entered into. This is a very, very real and emerging area. And I think this goes to the labor, how's labor being protected? How are people being protected? What access do people have to the health and safety, kind of needs that they have at work? At the same time, in trade agreements, looking at, are there ways that women and products that men and women use, are they treated differentially in trade agreements? We certainly know that's true, in some trade agreements where you see that there are higher tariffs on some goods that women most particularly use or than men. But I think this is an area where it's really just emerging. And if you think about feminist foreign policy, obviously it has this, it's built on a lot of other work. So it's not as though it's really only 10 years old, but just this very focused way about thinking about feminist trade policy. Again, it's an emerging concept. So I think this is a place where there's a need for a lot more research and a lot more also pushing of government to be very serious in looking at the impact of their trade policy, both externally and internally. So, right now, Canada has a feminist trade policy. Sweden had one, but of course they don't have a feminist foreign policy any longer. So again, this is something that's emerging, and I would think that as countries across the globe take this on, particularly countries that are, heavily engaged in trade, that this should become something that people really look at.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Yes. Next, I think we'll go ahead with Achala Dahalji. Please go ahead with your question, and then we'll just take a couple more questions, and that will be the end of Q&A session. Yeah, please go ahead.
Good evening and hello everyone. I'm Achala Dahal. I'm from Kathmandu, currently working at Nepal Administrative Staff College. So my question was, one was to share a few things about what Ms. Stephen has shared about Nepal's practices. So yes, Nepal has recently started talking about feminist foreign policy. It might be because we just has our first female foreign secretary at this time. So I think that was one advantage of we started that discourse recently. Also, the requirement of this discourse is because I think Nepal now is in the golden spheres of its population size, where the most productive population is there in a country. But the negative part of it is like the most of those productive population is in international migration, labor migrations, and out of that, the much spheres is now towards the women. The women are in international labor migrations, and there is a severe problem of what we have discussed earlier. Is like there is a severe problem of their safe health and safety, their security, and also the other problem that the women on international migration is facing is about the nominal fixing of those nominal wages that they get. So that is the major reasons I think these feminist approach is now much required for Nepal. My question also was I've raised in Q&A section is like there has been enough discussion about what's the problem, what's going on. But I think the discussion about the problem, solution of those problems, it's very difficult to raise, or those discussions are very not given the importance as the discussion of problem is given. I think so that's one of the most crucial areas where I want to discuss. I think one where you have shared it, like the political will and the leadership will was one of the major thing. I think that is one also the thing. But for Nepal, I think those discourse is very much important about how those problems could be resolved so that these feminist approach and foreign policies could address these issues. So that was my question. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And thanks for that information about Nepal. I mean, I always like to hear what's really going on after reading articles about things in the paper. Look, I think it's very easy to diagnose the problem, but you're right, solutions are really critical. And, I think one of the things that's very enlightening, and we see across the countries that have a feminist foreign policy, is that there are things these countries are doing that can be looked at and then, if appropriate, replicated in other places. So that is one thing I would encourage you all to do as you're moving through this fellowship and thinking about, what you want to write and where you want to go with it, is, looking at what's gone on in other places and what seems to have had an impact. Those certainly are not the only things that a feminist foreign policy, trade, or development policy, those are not the only things to do. But there are things that have, worked seemingly in other places around increasing some of the most basic things, increasing the number of women, gender analysis, gender advisors, things like that. What has worked and what might work in your view, and then what are other ideas? And I think, look, this is a very dynamic space. There are lots of different views about how radical feminist foreign policy is. And I think that's exciting. I mean, I think that's what we see across these countries, right? One country taking a very pacifist approach, the others not. It's a very dynamic space. So really looking at what are solutions that have worked in other places and what are some that maybe no one has thought about, and really bringing those to the forefront and trying to figure out what works to solve the very real problems that we face around the world. I think you're totally right. We have to think about solutions and be really mindful of the need to address the issues as they impact people on the ground.
Thank you so much, ma'am. And next we'll go ahead with Tayaba Atik ji, and this will be followed by Nandita ji and Mehta ji, and that will be all for the Q&A today. Tayabaji, if you're here, then please unmute yourself, turn on your video, and you can ask the question.
Sure. Hi, everyone.
You're not clearly audible. Yeah. Tayabaji, can you try speaking again?
I'm speaking up. I don't know if you guys can hear me or
Yes,
not.
yes,
Okay.
it's clear now.
We can hear. Yes.
So yeah, my question is actually about
Please
the extent
introduce
of.
yourself. Please
All right.
introduce yourself.
So I am Tayyaba Atiq. I'm from Pakistan. I'm currently working as program coordinator for a center called Center for Strategy and Cultural Diplomacy. So my question right now is actually about the extent of realistic perspectives into the feminist foreign policy, because feminism itself a phenomena which surrounds with the values and ideas which are more idealistic in nature. And when we talk about international relations, we see a realistic perspective as dominant, as leading the foreign policies across the world. So, how much optimistic are you when it comes to seeing the application of the feminist foreign policy approach? Because eventually, even if states accept it in their foreign policies, still there would be a politicization of the concept, because ultimately, again, realism will gonna win, because of the power centric world we live in. Which this politicization might result into shadowing the real purpose of the feminism. So what's your take on to this?
Look, I think that's a, right, real politic, right? That's the way we talk about foreign policy. But I would say at the same time, very important to think about what are we actually promulgating in our foreign policies. And so one of the things that's, always important is that sort of tension between idealism and sort of a vision and then how it happens on the ground. I think there is, a tremendous amount of power in the idealism around feminist foreign policy. And it's also very practical, because we know that when countries are more gender equal, there are better outcomes in terms of peace and security and prosperity. We know that. The research shows us that. So in reality, feminist foreign policy, or paying attention to gender equality in foreign policy, has very real outcomes that have a very real impact in the world. And so to me, feminist foreign policy is an interesting thing, because it is idealistic, but it's also very practical. And so to me, I think using the research to really drive those conversations is very important, because this is something that really makes a difference. It's not just saying we're for something, but it's actually using research and data to show that engaging and ensuring there's gender equality has a positive outcome for a country and for its foreign policy.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Nandita ji, would you like to go ahead?
Yes, ma'am. Am I audible, ma'am?
Yes.
Yeah. Please
Okay.
introduce yourself.
Yes, sure, ma'am. Ma'am, I'm Nandita, and I am a master's student at University of Delhi in Department of Political Science. And my question is that, is it really possible to build a coherent foreign policy, feminist foreign policy, even within a country, especially in countries of South Asia, where we see that there are a lot of dichotomies and intersectionalities that exist within feminism as a movement itself? So, is it really possible for us to go ahead and make it as a universal label of like feminist foreign policy, considering the dichotomies that exist within countries like South Asia, where we have like women cannot be categorized as a universal label in itself? So do you think, will it be only a universal category in itself, or would it even consider the diversities that would it also entail to? Like, that is my question, ma'am.
Okay, and that's the last question, right? Am I
Just
right?
one more, Nimita Pandey, and
one more. Okay.
Yes.
Well, okay. I mean, yes, I think it's up to, look, every country's different. And I think feminist foreign policy can be applicable anywhere. So the point is, thinking about those concepts, seeing what's happened in other places, I think, yes, I mean, I think the idea is that advocates, civil society, academia, people within government who are, and the political system who are focused on this, I mean, that's, yes, I think the answer is yes, but that's up to really the context, right? And that's why each country is different, because, you know, if we look at countries like Mexico, very diverse, you know, Colombia, pretty diverse. There are lots and lots of different, you know, intersectionalities, as we say, in every country. And so it's really, the concept can be really applied anywhere. And that's something I would encourage you to think about. How is it applicable in your countries, and how would it be applicable? Because I do think this set of constructs can work anywhere, but certainly I wouldn't be the one to say how it could work in India or in you know, Nepal or anywhere else. I think it's, or Pakistan. It's really incumbent upon the actors in that sphere to think about how this set of concepts can really be moved forward.
Thank you for your answer, ma'am. Finally, yeah, Nandita ji, please go ahead with your question.
Thank you, Priyanka. I hope I'm audible.
Yes.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much, Ms. Foster, for this. And first of all, I would just congratulate Professor Vibhuti for this wonderful thing, and IMPRI for that. And it's wonderful to see Professor Anuradha, who has inspired me when I was doing my PhD in JNU at Center for Studies in Science Policy. And also when I was working at RIS at some point, when she would come to give different kinds of lectures during in some of the interventions. Lovely to see you all. So my quick question.
Please introduce yourself. Please introduce.
Sure. Presently, I'm working as an assistant professor at the Department of Social Data Science and Policy at Amrita University at the Faridabad campus, which is in Haryana. So I was just tempted, and I posted 2 questions, but I would pose one of them for you. You talked about local, subnational, national context when one has to think about feminist foreign policies. I was wondering how the process of policy coherence and interconnectedness itself needs to be feminized, because from a policy governance perspective, which in turns fuel into or helps us to develop more inclusive feminist foreign policies. So if we are talking about local, subnational levels, how do we do that process from a bottom-up approach at looking at different policies? It would be lovely to hear you. Yeah, thank you.
You know, I think that's another sort of challenging question. I mean, feminist foreign policy across the countries that have one right now, it's been much more of a top-down kind of thing, right? And so, you know, Justin Trudeau, for example, saying, implementing a feminist foreign policy, or President Petro in Colombia. So it is an interesting contrast to, say, women, peace, and security, which a lot of it kind of bubbled up from the bottom. So I don't know that there's an answer, except to say that the fact that it has been more top down does create some issues, because then when governments change, you know, political, whoever's head of government, for example, in Sweden, that means that that policy framework is at risk. So the question then becomes, how do you institutionalize those policies? And then to your point, how do you kind of ensure that they're institutionalized across various levels of government? I don't know that there's been that much thinking about that yet. So that's a good place to also think about, you know, how to focus more on those set of issues. But it is true that feminist foreign policy to date has been much more top down than kind of bottom up. Though, as I said, there's obviously grassroots interest, but it is a little bit different than some of these other frameworks that we see that have kind of come out of the feminist movement, come out of sort of gender equality movements. So it's another area where there's a lot more to be learned. A lot more to be learned.
Thank you. Thank you.
Special request, please allow Sanda Thant from Myanmar to speak, please. This is the last one. Sandaji, please go ahead. Yeah, she's from Myanmar. Hello.
Hi.
Yeah. Are you there, Sanda? Hello, Miss Sanda. Your question you have asked about is that what can be done in a country where there is a militarization and are you there, Ms. Sanda? You have requested that your question should be answered.
I think she can't use the mic, so she wants someone to read it.
Hello?
Yeah.
Hello.
Hello, please go ahead. Yeah.
Yes, thank you for the allowing me to raise the question that.
Please introduce yourself. Yeah.
Yes, my name is Sanda. I'm recently residing in Thailand for the life-threatening by the military. During the so-called civilian government, we means that women rights organization also working for gender equality, and we did some like achievement, but now with this militarization, all has gone. So, but my question is that, but we are fighting for this, and also we will win. So my question is, with this very patriarchy, deeply rooted society and militarization and diverse, and also of course intersectionality. So in this context, is there any like entry point from your experience to have this feminist foreign policy? Thank you.
I mean, it's a very, obviously, a difficult situation. I mean, I think, and again, this is not a great answer. So much about, how civil society obviously from outside government can really develop frameworks and constructs to advocate. You're in a situation that's not exactly advocacy friendly, let's just put it that way. But I think sort of how you build public support or support from people within your country who are either still there or outside, I mean, I think that's really important, and making the argument about why feminist foreign policy can lead to better outcomes. And again, this goes to the arguments around gender equality and peace, prosperity, and security. So again, not a great answer. I mean, it's so kind of not interesting is the wrong word, but I've worked a lot in Afghanistan, which is not the same at all, but there are some similarities in terms of how do you advocate for human rights and women's rights in authoritarian regimes. There's no good answer, and I certainly don't purport to have one. But, what I've heard from a lot of people is that the importance of developing these arguments and just continuing to push forward with them. And I know that's really hard. And I also know that it's easy for me to say that. I'm not where you are. So I don't know that I have a great answer, except for to say it's really important to take these concepts of why gender equality matters in foreign policy and develop them in a way that's relevant for you all and use that to push forward.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Now I welcome Dr. Vaishali Singh, Assistant Research Manager, IMPRI, to kindly take us through the guideline documents briefly. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Meenu, and a very good evening to everyone.
Before we get to Vaishali, Ms. Stephenie Foster, I thank you gratefully for being here with us today, for giving us your time, and so early in the morning as well. Thank you for being so patient with answering all of the questions that the cohort has had. We cannot thank you enough, and we look forward to working with you always. And it's always a pleasure learning from you. We hope that we keep on learning from you all the time. Thank you so much for being here with us today, ma'am.
Well, thank you. And thank you so much for having me. I look forward to hearing about how the fellowship works out and look forward to, reading your papers. And so thank you for having me. And we'll all forge forward together. So again, thank you. I'm going to sign off. It's now getting light outside where I am. So that's good. Anyway, I will, again, so look forward to hearing about the success of this fellowship. Thanks.
You deserve a nice cup of coffee.
Thank you, ma'am.
Another one.
Correct. Yeah. Right.
Yes, with that, Vaishali, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Priyanka. Thank you, Ms. Stephenie Foster. And moving forward, we're going to present the guidelines document to the fellows. We can have it on the screen, please.
Yes, just give me a second.
So as part of the fellowship program, fellows are requested to submit a research article that will be published as a chapter in the ISBN edited book. Due to the give you a brief outline of what all is going to be expected and to provide you more detail on the research article writing, the timelines that are supposed to be adhered to, and the reading resource material that will be shared with you. That's why we're presenting you the guidelines document. This will be shared with you over email along with the session video links after each session. So this is how the document is going to be outlined here. If we can move on with the slide, please. Right. The content of the guidelines document contains the details about the fellowship, its starting dates, and the event page related. If we can move ahead. Right. We can move ahead, please. We have provided you with a list of experts as well. And here you'll find the program time structure also to keep yourself updated with the next session. And also the due courses of requirements of the fellowship that will be required has also been mentioned in the timeline, which is going to come forward. Right. So this is a research essay timeline that is provided in the guidelines document for your reference. As we have received your topics and abstract, which was October 15, the last deadline, we have also provided you different date for your final submission, which is going to be on November 10th of an extended abstract. And further, there's details of November 15, which is going to be discussion about your creative project selection and further discussion with our expert and chair. Then December 6th, we have the Fellows Creative Project presentation and discussion, which is going to happen based on the findings of your research paper. We are going to have a small PPT on that based on 3 to 4 minutes PPT. It's going to happen on December 6th and December 13th. And then from December 21st onwards, we're going to start receiving your research essay draft submission. Since your research essays are due for a review, that's why we're going to go through a review process as well, which is going to span for a month's period, which is from Jan 4th. Research essay expert editorial review is going to happen. And then on Jan 11th, we're going to have the final research essay submission from the fellows, after which the publication of the book will start. If we can move ahead with the slide, please. Yes, we have also provided you a brief information on the creative project that is expected out of the fellows to present at the end of your fellowship. We have provided you a brief overview over here. If we can move ahead, please. Yes, we have also provided you with the details of the extended abstract submission and deadline, which is going to be in length of 2000 words, and the submission deadline is also mentioned. And we have also mentioned what all aspects, apart from your methodology and the research gap that you're going to address, there are certain other aspects also that is supposed to be included in the abstract, which includes a brief note of your mode of expression of the presentation that you're going to undertake at the end of the fellowship, along with the short bio on about yourself in 75 to 100 words. If we can move ahead, please. Then we are provided with a brief program highlights that the fellows can explore and go through that. We have also provided you guideline, research guideline stages and phases as well, how a research article or research is actually done, and what are the different components and phases that are supposed to be undertaken when you're doing your research. If we can go ahead, please. We have provided you in detail the different phases where tool testing, ethics, fieldwork aspect, if it's required at a particular fellow's research. We have provided you details on that. Right. So the research article that you're going to submit is going to have a particular style guidelines. For that, we have provided you a detailed guideline here. Kindly refer to it when you're writing your research article and providing it for submission at IMPRI. Yes, we have also provided with the references. We follow APA style citation, and you can see the references. We have provided with examples in detail. You can refer to this wherever you're using references, citation, in-text citations. At the end, you're supposed to provide references, endnotes. So you kindly refer to this style guideline for that purpose. Yes, we have also provided you a section of AI skill use for researchers, which can be utilized by the researchers to work on their literature review and further work on their grammar or grammar check and for their plagiarism report checking. So we have provided you a list of different tools that are available at the free usage. So fellows can explore this section as well to understand the various AI use. If we can, yes. We have also provided you post-submission guidelines. Post-submission guidelines are going to help fellows to understand after you're going to create your report, which is going to be a research report, and after providing your paper for the publication as in the edited book. There are different platforms where you can get your research paper further published or to have more outreach and to have more discourse on your issue. So we have provided you with the list and the steps that you can follow, such as creating your profile at ResearchGate and Academia to have further explore your research to other researchers, policymakers, and have further discussion over it. Then you can also submit it as a blog article at IMPRI as well, and 800 to 1,000 words. And outside of IMPRI, you can obviously give a small write-up at the EPA, SAGE journals. IPRR journal is one of the journal of IMPRI. You can also make a submission there. And there are different platforms where you can submit your article, which are journals, which can be UGC Care listed, Scopus, Web of Sciences, that can be further explored by the fellows. If you can move ahead, please. Right, you can also give your articles in op-ed and electronic newspapers, and further can give it for abstract for paper presentations and different conferences as well to have more input in your research, and you can further work on this research topic based on the inputs that you can get on the conference platform. We can move ahead, please. Right, there's also creatives for social media as part of your research. If someone is undertaking a fieldwork based or a non-doctrinal based research, they can obviously have some clippings of their fieldwork that can be shared in the form of reels or short at IMPRI. We can publish it at the social media platforms as well. Right, so this is the list of reading resources that our experts have shared. We have provided you in the guidelines document that fellows can explore. There's links attached to them. If you're not able to find any of them, please write it to us at learning email ID, which I'm going to share and mention in the guidelines document as well, to let us know if you're not able to access any of the PDFs that is provided by experts. Further, as and when the fellowship progresses, we're going to add on to more of the reading resources that our experts are going to share with us. Yes, if we can move ahead, please. Right, so this is the email ID. If you can go back, Priyanka, please, once. For any queries, you can write it to us at learning@impri@gmail.com. And if you require any clarification with respect to your research paper topics, you can obviously write it to us. We'll help you get support from our experts and chairs to further understand your topic or further refine your topic. Also, this is going to be shared with you over email, as I said. And moving forward, we're going to present the topics of the fellows that has been submitted. We're going to present it to you right now on the screen. The list of research topic that the fellows have selected is going to publish in a separate link as well, which we will share as and when the topics get more finalized after due approval from our experts and chair. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Vaishali. With that, I'll hand over to Meenu to please carry the session forward towards the participants' introduction. Participants, kindly accept the join as panelist link because that will allow you to turn on the videos if you wish to do so. And to move in an orderly fashion, if you can raise hands, that would be lovely. Thank you. Meenu, please take over.
Yep. So we'll proceed to participants' introduction, and as Priyanka said, you can raise hands and we will invite you one by one to briefly introduce yourselves and share your interests on the program.
Nobody has raised hand. Tayyab Atik ji, yeah. Tayyaba, Miss Tayyab.
Hi everyone, I am Tayyaba Atik. I am from Pakistan, as mentioned earlier, and I have completed my graduation in international relations from Gift University, an educational institute in my town, Gujranwala, and I completed my graduation actually last year in 2023, and after that I started my journey as coordinator at a research think tank called Center for Strategy and Cultural Diplomacy, where I am currently working as well. Apart from this, I have also been involved in various of the organizations at global level. Like I'm being part of a ambassador program at Doha Debates, where where we are supposed to create a virtual majlis, and I am taking the lead at creating a majlis or a sort of discussion forum on the topic of women empowerment into politics. And apart from this, I'm also involved and currently taking up a program at IEP, International Economics and Peace Institute, IEP Ambassador Program. And yeah, just the very shortest introduction actually. And yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tayyaba. And just a housekeeping announcement. Participants can introduce themselves via their name, designation, organization, location, and your motivation of joining the fellowship, and also mention your research topic. Ms. Muskan Khanna, please, can you go ahead?
Am I audible?
Yes.
Hello, everybody. My name is Muskan Khanna. I currently put up in Delhi, and I am a PhD researcher at the Department of African Studies, University of Delhi. So there I'm researching on digitalization of public diplomacy, and I'm trying to do like a constructivist comparative analysis between India and South African social media policies. So the motivation for me to basically join in was that since I'm already working on digitalization and African foreign policy, why not bring in a gendered lens to look at how African foreign policy is going on, and probably looking at the digitalization of feminist foreign policy. So that is, thank you.
Thank you, Muskan. Ms. Aditi Mishra, if you could go ahead.
Hello, I am Aditi Mishra from Kathmandu, Nepal. I'm originally from the Tarai region of Nepal, Sarlai. I belong to the indigenous Maithili community, and that is one of the reasons I wanted to join this fellowship in order to bring the indigenous women's voices to the platform. And I am currently a student at St. Javis College, Maithili, Nepal, as a student of journalism, mass communication, and English literature. I've worked in NGOs and media organizations, the NGO being Good Shepherd, where I've worked with trafficked women, rehabilitation and rescue center. I think that is one reason also that I wanted to work where gender equality is seen, is promoted and talked about. And yeah, I think that is all about me. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Aditi. Ms. Bhanupriya Jaiswal, please go ahead.
Hello, everyone. Hello.
Yes. You're audible.
Hello, everyone. I am Bhanupriya Jaiswal. I am research scholar of GNU, Center for South Asian Studies. My research topic is Buddhist heritage tourism in Nepal with special reference to Lumbini. What motivated to join this is my motivation to join this program stem from the strong passion for leveraging digital diplomacy to promote the gender equality and amplify the voice of Indian women in global governance. I aim to contribute to shaping the inclusive foreign policy while joining with the diverse international network to foster impactful global changes. I have done as I have done a work as an internship Minister of Women and Child Development Ministry. Thank you.
Thank you, Bhanupriya. Ms. Nimita Pandey, please go ahead.
Hello, everyone. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. So I am Nimita Pandey. I am presently an assistant professor at the Department of Social Data Science and Policy at Amrita University, Faridabad campus. In terms of my short introduction, I hail from Bihar. However, my studies have been in Delhi most of the time in JNU. I finished my master's in economics and PhD in science policy. For this particular program, I draw inspiration from my previous work with RIS on science diplomacy, and then working at Amrita on Civil 20 under the G20, where we were a part of the Gender Equality and Women Empowerment Group. So I thought this could be a great platform to bring into life those discourses into more realistic way. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, Ms. Rasu Kumari Hami.
Hello, everyone. I'm Rasu Kumari Hami. I'm from Sri Lanka. I completed my master's in international relations in the University of Colombo, and currently I'm doing diploma in diplomacy and world affairs. So that is the reason mainly that I really like to engage with regarding the feminist foreign policy. And I'm a research associate at the Pathfinder Foundation. Currently, I'm working with there. Earlier, I was actually coordinator of the Women's Affairs Human Rights Organization in Sri Lanka. At that time, particularly, I engaged with most of the women who are suffering from especially rural areas in our country. And I engaged with recently Center for Humanitarian Dialogue, Geneva. Especially, it's a topic about the IUU fishing combating of the Bay of Bengal region. So in this research, I personally engage with the fisheries community sectors, females who are suffering from the these fishing disputes and these matters. And we can see right now as a country, as a region, we can see that women in politics is my main topic of that I submitted for this thing, because we can see that far behind from the Asian countries, women engaging with the politics. If they are entering to the politics, it's because of mainly their families, male personalities engaging with the politics. Other than that, they cannot engaging into the politics as independent figures. So my research topic based on that. That's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Rasu. Next, Vin Pike Mew, if you could introduce yourself.
Am I audible?
Yes.
Yes.
Good evening once again. I'm Achala Dahab.
Hello.
I'm currently, yes.
Okay.
Am I audible?
Yes.
Good evening once again. I'm currently from Nepal, Kathmandu. As I said, I work at Nepal Administrative Staff College. It's administrative staff college where it's a national level training institutions for officers of government of Nepal. So I work in a position of director of studies. What motivates me to join this course is like I've been working in area of gender for around 10 years now, moreover on the policy spheres of gender. So obviously, as this area is one of the growing and most promising, I think most needed areas where interventions is required. So my research, I hope my research will help the government of Nepal to identify the areas of interventions or the existing areas where how the foreign policies of Nepal could be made more just inclusive and resolve the issues that Nepalese men and women is facing out of those foreign diplomacy. By education, I'm MPhil in public policy and I've done MBA from Anna University, Chennai. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Vin Pike Mew, please go ahead. Sorry for the confusion earlier.
Yes. Okay. Thank you for your advice. Hello, everyone. My name is Wim Pai Mew, and I am representative of the PAN-DA organization. Our organization is committed to the empowering the women and ensuring they have the voice in decision-making space in every sector, every sector and every places. So currently, we are focusing on the humanitarian efforts through the feminist perspectives, promoting the inclusivity and justice in the world in Myanmar. So I am really excited to be part of this courses. My topic is the feminist perspectives on humanitarian aid in Myanmar conflict areas, the focus to the conflict areas. So this theory is the significant aim to break the gap between the feminist theory and humanitarian practices. So I will land off about that one. So I look forward to learning and sharing insight with all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Moving on, Ms. Shambhavi Thite, please introduce yourself.
Oh, hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm Shambhavi Thite. I am a senior doctoral fellow at Center for Innovation Studies, School of International Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. I have done my master's in Eurasian Studies. So since master's, my focus area has been Central Asia. For my PhD, I am actually working on the process of democratization in Kyrgyzstan, and I'm actually looking at the role of women in the process of democratization and in the political movements of Kyrgyzstan. For this particular program, I want to work on the topic, which is like feminist approaches to conflict resolution, and I want to basically examine the role of gender in post-conflict peace building in Tajikistan. As we all know, there has been a Tajik civil war, and it was a biggest man-made disaster after the collapse of Soviet Union in Central Asia. So I really want to assess the role and the long-term effect of a woman exclusion from the peace building process and from the reconciliation efforts. So that's it. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Moving on, Dr. Janki Antharia, please go ahead.
I'm Janki Antharia. I'm a professor at the Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Mumbai in India. And currently I'm with the School of Disaster Studies. We run an online program with the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies. We've been doing that for the last 12 years. And I think the whole idea of what goes on in the humanitarian space, which very often is a direct outcome of conflict, bad sort of international relations, pursuing things that I think as feminists we sort of challenge. And one is really curious as to how do you make something work at a at an international level, when at the local level itself you may have challenges, number one. Number two, I also see a lot of contradiction in pursuing a feminist agenda across countries. So I think I'm joining this out of curiosity, I would say. And specifically in the humanitarian space, if I look at ASEAN, SAARC, or BIMSTEC, these are formations, tend to be pretty much toothless, but there is probably scope and room for us to experiment or, build in an agenda of feminist diplomacy out there. So, yeah, I think that's about me. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Ms. Neha Thomas, please go ahead. Ms.
Capacity of an assistant professor. I'm also a doctoral student at Savitribai Phule Pune University, and my area of research interest spans from gender studies, cultural studies, as well as policy development. And I have published certain papers with certain reputed journals regarding policy development, gender studies, as well as cultural studies. And my main motivation to join this, participate in this particular fellowship is to learn more about the feminist perspective on foreign fellowship, foreign diplomacy. But at the same time, after my doctoral studies, I would like to go for or to work within the spectrum of women and children in conflict zones. And that is one of the specific reasons I have confirmed my participation for the fellowship. Thank you.
Thank you. Santha Tanji, please go ahead.
Hello, yes. Good evening, everybody. My name is Sandata. I am originally from Myanmar, but now residing in Thailand, working in the Asian Institute of Technology as a research associate. My motivation is actually since I read about this feminist foreign policy in Canada, as I also would like to learn about this. But now, my topic is a feminist foreign policy for Myanmar, exploring gaps and possibilities. Now we have our National Unity Government. National Unity Government has one of the ministry is the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Ministry of Foreign Affairs has a policy, but now we are also fighting against the military to build new Myanmar, federal democratic Myanmar. So in that case, in preparation for federal democracy country, I also, this is also my motivation to contribute that feminist perspective, firstly in the foreign policy. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Mr. Praveen Raj, please go ahead.
Hi everyone, I'm Praveen Raj from Jharkhand, currently residing in Bangalore. I'm a geopolitical risk analyst at Varisgo. My motivation for joining this fellowship is to, I come from a media governance background. I've done my master's from Jamia Millia Islamic University, New Delhi. And I want to understand the contemporary discourse around the foreign policy, looking from the gender perspective and especially focusing on the media lens, how the narrative is being shaped through the media narratives and how it is being dispersed around the world. So that's the small intro about me. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Rajnandani, please go ahead.
Hello everyone, am I audible?
Yes, you.
Hello, I'm Rajnandini from Bihar, India. I recently completed my master's in English literature from BHU. I'm here because I wanted to understand the position of women in international politics, and I'm currently working on my PhD proposal that's related to menstruation in literature, and I wanted to understand how international policies affect menstrual laws and women body related decisions. So that's why my research idea was comparative study of war blood and menstrual blood and how it's treated. That's all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Tarunika Roy, please go ahead.
Hello everyone, my name is Tarunika Roy and I'm a PhD scholar at Center for East Asian Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University, and I'm working on Korea's women issues and low fertility rates. And right now I'm in Korea for my field research, and my motivation to join this fellowship is so that I can learn more about women's inclusion in decision making positions. And for this fellowship, my proposal was to explore the role of women in reconciliation process uh, between two Koreas. Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Pinku Jha, please go ahead.
A very good evening to everyone. I'm Pinku Jha. Currently, I'm in Jaipur, India. I'm working as an assistant professor in the Department of Development Studies, and I'm teaching international relations there. Also, I'm pursuing a PhD in Indian political thought, basically on Mahabharata. So I found it very interesting when I found about this particular fellowship that we can have something called feminist foreign policy, which was somehow I was just a bit of aware about this particular idea, but I thought this 3 months can enrich my understanding about this particular phenomena and this particular idea. So that's why I have applied for this, and the title that I have shared for this particular proposal, maybe I can say that it was related to, I was trying to connect Indian thought, like I was looking at foreign policy, again the feminist foreign policy, if there's any possibility to connect it from the Indic tradition or something possible to see foreign policy or some inputs we can make from the classical Indian thought in this particular domain. So this is what I have proposed as of now. So this is all. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Ahana Singh, please go ahead.
Hi, my name is Ahana Singh. I am a student of literature, political science, and business in Symbiosis, and I want to focus on decolonizing feminist foreign policy. I've always been really interested in the study of gender and international relations in my studies, and focusing on how feminist lenses change mainstream state-centric policy making. So this fellowship really gives me a great opportunity to connect with a community of like-minded scholars, and to leverage critical sources and gain mentorship that can obviously make my research miles and miles better. Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Jumani Pathak, please go ahead.
Hello everyone. My name is Jumoni Patel. I'm currently doing my PhD research in Central University of Kerala, Public Administration and Policy Studies. I did my master's from TIS in Public Policy and Governance. So that's when I realized I'm very much interested in policy, gender, and its implication to migration. Recently, I was working on an article which is based on how the women from Bangladesh migrates. Particularly, I'm from Assam, so it was kind of relation to me. So that's when I understood that, okay, migration has certain implications, particularly related to gender. So when I found about this, fellowship, it made me realize, okay, I can work something more better. I can come up with new policy solutions for this. So yeah, that's all about it. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Aditya Mishra, please go ahead.
I'm Adi Mishra. I am a PhD scholar at in US Studies, School of International Studies in FISGNU. And my topic for this is I am working on as a PhD scholar on the outer space domain that is called as also called as astropolitics. And for this, I want to look how uh, inclusion of females, women, and people from other genders can transform the overall domain, how the domain of outer space is looked at, and how its militarization and other implications can be tackled with the inclusion of people from other genders also, than being traditional male-dominated area. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Claire Edbacon, please go ahead.
Hi everyone. Hello, I am Claire Edbacon. I'm from the Philippines, but I am currently based in Thailand because I'm pursuing my graduate studies at Thammasat University. I'm a first year graduate student of MA in Asia Pacific Studies under the Thammasat Institute of Area Studies. But I'm also currently affiliated with the University of the Philippines, Tacloban College, as an instructor of political science. And prior to joining the academe, I worked with a women's rights NGO in the Philippines, the Women's Legal and Human Rights Bureau, which is working on issues related to increasing access to justice of marginalized women and girl children. So for my research interest for this fellowship, I'm actually interested in looking at the development of women, peace, and security agenda in the ASEAN, since it's a relatively new regional document, and I believe that it's the closest thing that we can have for a feminist foreign policy, at least at this point. And for my research, I want to specifically explore whether ASEAN's relationship with middle powers who are norm entrepreneurs of feminist foreign policy, middle powers such as Australia, whether they have a role in the development of this WPS agenda, and if there is, what is the extent of that role. As for my motivation for joining the fellowship, I've always been interested in international relations, and ever since I worked with the Women's Rights NGO, I wanted to pursue a research field that is a nexus of these two broad interests of mine. And working in a women's organization also offered me a front row seat to the struggles of women on the ground. And as Ms. Foster has as mentioned in her earlier lecture, I also came into the realization that in that line of work that the national and subnational is actually the international and vice versa. And so I also share the same sentiment that I think a feminist foreign policy is a perspective or lens that bridges these different levels. And so I applied for this fellowship because I want to be immersed with experts from the global south with regard feminist foreign policies, specifically to be updated with the current debates about the topic, about the issue, to gather ideas on how I can fully develop my research agenda and hopefully gain insights on how to practice feminist research methods and apply these methods in my research agenda. So that would be all for me. Nice meeting everyone.
Thank you. Ms. Aditi, please go ahead.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Aditi. Last year, I've completed my Master's in Public Policy and Governance from Tata Institute of Social Sciences. Currently, I'm working as a development professional in Grant Thornton, Bharat, where I'm working on an implementation project where we are trying to enhance the income of women farmers in Jharkhand. During this whole project, which I'm currently part of, I have been able to interact with women farmers who were, also victims of domestic violence and social conflict, and how they have maneuvered and not just being the victim, as well as they have also, right now, they are one of the active participants in trying to reduce these type of conflicts and be the decision maker in their own region. And that actually piqued my interest when I started thinking about how it pans out when it comes to international peace and security and the international conflicts that we are dealing with currently. And that is why my interest peaked, and I participated, and I wanted to get into this fellowship program. My topic for the research is on implementation and impact of the UNSC resolution 1325 that has been that has been adopted since 2000. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Nalini Ratnaraj, are you there?
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. And I'm Nalini Ratnaraja from Sri Lanka. I am a war-affected woman from war-affected zone. I'm working for war-affected women, especially the disabled female ex-combatants. So I am a human rights activist and trainer and resource person working with various civil society organization, movement and groups in Sri Lanka and South Asia, beyond that. So I'm an activist. I'm not an academic. But throughout my activism and professional journey, I have worked to challenge the systematic inequality faced by women and marginalized groups while educating women and women's group. This program definitely going to enable me to expand my expertise and contribute to shaping equitable foreign policy. And further, my goal of influencing both national and international agenda to ensure that gender equality remains at the forefront of diplomatic and political decision making. As all of us know, the Sri Lanka is in severe debt crisis. And here more dialogue can how debt crisis is impacting women problem, but we have to go in deeper to see how the debt crisis it's affecting the climate justice, and this is women are affected. So my research topic would be women, debt and climate justice, feminist foreign policy strategy for Sri Lanka. So that's my interest, because as an activist, I want to learn more about policy reform, because in Sri Lankan context, this is 17th discussion with the IMF, and no women participated in the discussion. And they are making over and over mistakes, which, put more burden and problem on women. Also, the IMF always telling us to focus on tourism, not on farmers and fishers. So these topics, I really want to do a research to give for Sri Lankan government or any other. What is the solution we can have, and the impact and the problem women are facing, where women are the backbone of the economy, foreign revenue to Sri Lanka. Thank you. I'm looking forward to learn from each one of you to enhance my knowledge and my expertise. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Bushra Ali Khan, please go ahead.
Hello, everyone. My name is Bushra Ali Khan. I have completed my master's in anthropology in 2021 from SOAS University of London. Right now, I'm visiting India for fieldwork as a researcher affiliated with the University of Sussex. So my research interests revolve around international refugee law, climate-induced migration, South Asian geopolitics. Over the past few years, I have conducted field research in refugee camps in New Delhi, collaborated with national, international think tanks and NGOs, presented my articles in book chapters at global seminars and conferences. I joined this fellowship because incorporating intersectionality into my work with migrant and refugee communities is essential. And this is a lens that has been, it has been lacking in my positionality, and addressing the complex layers of identity, including gender, race, and class in both policymaking and fieldwork is crucial for ensuring that the needs and rights of marginalized communities are fully recognized. So through this fellowship, I hope to deepen my understanding of these intersections and work towards developing more inclusive and equitable local, national, and international policies that better serve these communities. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Nandita Kapoor, please go ahead.
Hello. Am I audible, ma'am?
Yeah, you are audible.
Okay, thank you. I'm Nandita Kapoor, and I'm pursuing Masters from University of Delhi from Political Science Department. I was interested in this fellowship because I have been always interested in gender studies as a subject, and I have also presented my book chapters at various conferences, which relates to the intersectionality of gender and foreign policy in itself. And therefore, I was interested in joining this fellowship so that I could also learn from the expert who would be delivering sessions related to their particular domain. And my research topic is basically looking at the nexus between the gender and the securitization, which follows a certain alternative paradigm in international relations. So basically, my idea is to break down the dichotomy or to break down the masculinist paradigm which has been set up in international relations, and through critical lens, I would be examining how how feminism or how feminist movement could be involved in this arena. And then I would be exploring basically an alternative framework within the hegemonic masculinities which has been instituted within the IR itself. And yes, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Umehani Ahmed ji, please go ahead.
Hello everyone, my name is Umehani Ahmed. I'm a second year master's student in international relations at Loyola College, Chennai. I bring a unique philosophical lens to international relations shaped by my undergraduate studies at Sophia College, Mumbai. My academic journey from philosophy to IR has been driven by a deep interest in examining how gender and power dynamics influence global politics. So, growing up in Mumbai and witnessing various security challenges firsthand, combined with my academic exposure to feminist philosophy through Martha Nussbaum's capabilities approach, has led me to question traditional state centric approaches to international relations. My motivation for joining this fellowship stems from a conviction that feminist foreign policy offers transformative possibilities for reshaping India's approach to regional security and development cooperation in South Asia, particularly in addressing the needs of marginalized populations often overlooked in conventional foreign policy frameworks. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Simran Rapid, please go ahead.
Okay, hello, namaskar everyone, and nice to hear from all of you. Introducing myself, my name is Simran Napith, and currently I'm working at. And talking about my academic background, then I pursued my master's degree in gender studies, and currently I'm working on my PhD regarding gender studies again. So yes, meeting with all like fellows and all the participants out here and all the panel, I'm really happy to see the engagement of women in such platforms. And in my excitement, I'd like to tell that recently I published my book on judiciary's dream, Sapana, and which is about the woman justice. And soon, like in a year, she's going to be the Chief Justice of our judiciary. So while writing this book, I'm really inspired by the total arena of how women engagement in the leadership position as well as decision-making capability. And at the same time, what motivates me to join this fellowship approach is that recently I organized the program in like Advancing Women in Law program, whereby I got to meet with so many young, emerging legal scholars, legal personnel who are working in the judiciary itself. And being a very passionate woman, what I particularly feel is that being in a patriarchal notion and living in such patriarchal notion, what I personally felt is that having the capabilities and also the enthusiasm to do something and to do something for a change, still they are lagging behind because of the male-dominated society and their conservative outset. So that driven my passion for women in engaging the decision-making process in legal as well as foreign policy. And that realm drives my interest in this initiative particularly. And I do personally believe that incorporating this diverse voices, not only young voices, but also the senior voices, also the international voices, also the regional voices. And that is very essential for creating the fair and effective legal system. And yes, so you see like in Nepal, like women's perspective in judiciary and policy, it does not enhance the quality of decision making, but you need to ensure that the needs of all the women and all the participation in the decision making process are represented. And I think that this fellowship program will really enhance my capability to encourage and to engage so many women out here in Nepal to ensure their needs and to raise their voices. So that's why I think that this platform will definitely equip my skills and networks that is really needed to influence the policy and legal outcomes in long run. So yes, but for me, like by fostering the environment and ambience where women can thrive as leaders, not only leaders, but successful leaders. And during the session also, we heard that there are many women leaders who are representing the nation. And similarly, in Nepal, recently we got like first woman chief secretariat and so on and so forth. Still, we need much more participation for the engagement. So for that, the collective work towards this most just and inclusive society. And I am really hopeful for this program. And thank you so much for having me. Thank you again.
Thank you. Ms. Mayuri Raghuvanshi, please go ahead.
Thank you very much for the wonderful session. My name is Mayuri Raghuvanshi. I am an advocate on record in Supreme Court, and I am currently pursuing my PhD from GD Goenka College, where my topic is appointment of women as judges of the Supreme Court and the development of feminist jurisprudence, a comparative study with reference to India and USA. And what has inspired me to come here and join this program is that I think this is very closely aligned with my area of research, and I will be better equipped after participating in this program to undertake that research work. So I'm really looking forward to learn from all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ms. Ekta Singh, please go ahead.
Am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
Yes. Hello everyone, a very good evening to you all. I'm Ekta Singh. I hail from Sultanpur district of Uttar Pradesh, India, and I have completed my graduation in political science and international relations from Banaras Hindu University and pursuing my master's in gender studies from the same institute. So I aspire to research on feminist issues in future, and I have keen interest in politics and welfare of women and children. And as a political science, international relations, and gender studies student, I found this particular fellowship very interesting and that overlap with my interest areas. And it will ultimately enhance my knowledge in my area of interest. And my topic for this particular fellowship is from invisibility to visibility: women as agents of war and peace. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Bharat Singh, would you like to introduce yourself via video?
Good evening, ma'am.
Please go ahead, sir.
I'm audible, ma'am?
Yes.
No, just I have texted, ma'am. Okay. So recently I have completed my PhD, ma'am, and I was working on Western Sahara conflict. So earlier in MPhil, my area was on political instability in Libya. So most of my work related to the conflict. And when I entered into the peace and conflict and security study, so they're mostly considered as this area as a man-dominated area. And I thought in the search of conflict resolutions methods or approaches, we are lacking something. And when I found this opportunity, the fellowship, feminist foreign policy or role of women in international politics, so I thought that now I have opportunity to expand my knowledge in different perspective where we can fill this gap. How women can contribute in such area where considered as mainly man dominated. That's why I in this fellowship, I am working on the project titled Feminizing Conflict Resolutions, a case study of Indian peacekeepers, women peacekeepers in Africa. So I thought now we can connect here. We can also compare the peace mission by the male forces or versus female forces. And when I was reading the literature review, and I found many interesting facts that women are more capable in resolving conflict, understanding the ground reality, like they can connect community and especially children and women are more feel comfortable when they reach out the female peacekeepers. So that's all, ma'am. That's my journey.
Thank you. We have a participant from the attendee section, Mr. Parvez Babu. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you so much. Am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
Oh, great. So, very good evening to you all. It's a great pleasure to be with you and to be selected for this fellowship. This is Parvez Babul. I have been working as a journalist and women rights activist in Bangladesh for many years. And I have been doing journalism more than 10 years, and I'm covering women's issues, gender issues, and climate change and women and disabilities, women and migration, etc. And before joining, I mean, in journalism, working in journalism, I have worked around 10 years at an American international organization. Name is Helen Keller International. And probably you know that Helen Keller was a blind lady. She did not see in her whole life, but she worked, I mean, miracle for the women and children with disabilities all over the globe. Okay. And Helen Keller is my, inspiration, as she was the icon and the catalyst. So that is why, following the principles, ideologies of Helen Keller, I want to be a change maker in women empowerment. So that is why I have been interested to working in these issues. And I have written more than 300 articles, especially on women in the English newspapers all over the world. And I have also 10 or 12 published books. And I have completed my master's on environmental science, but I have taken many trainings on women issues and gender issues, women in development, etc. at home and abroad. And in Nepal, in Malaysia, in Qatar, and in Morocco, I have traveled and worked on women issues, and especially, UNFCCC. I mean, it's the organization of United Nations. They're working on climate change. So I have participated on COP conference of the parties, COP22 in 2016 in Morocco, through the invitation of United Nations. And I have been inspired there that women in climate change and women in disaster and women in environment, those should be addressed. And especially, I am working in Bangladesh, but as you know, there is a term in English, think globally, act locally. So though I am acting locally, but I am thinking globally. So that is why I am to be a global feminist working locally. So I want to establish feminist foreign policy in Bangladesh first, then global south and all over the world. So I want to be a great change maker with the help of this fellowship. That is why I feel honored to be with you and I want to be continued. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Samukesi ji, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, good evening, good afternoon. So sorry, I won't be able to switch on my video because I'm in transit. So it might just break away the connection and everything. But my name is Samukezi Mrobulangwenya. I am from South Africa. I'm affiliated to the University of Limpopo. That's where I teach political science. But I've also been attempting over the years to introduce an undergraduate gender studies program. I did my master's in women and gender studies, and not just 2 years ago, I completed my PhD in political science, but theorizing in gender. My key interest, or what drew my interest in applying for this fellowship, and I need to say that I feel very honored and grateful for the opportunity to be chosen among so many applicants. But my key interest and the topic that I proposed was actually a question of which I truly do not have answers for, hoping that, through interactions and engagements with other scholars, especially from the Global South, I might be able to get a sense of what I want to do. My question was, can South Africa adopt or embrace, not really adopt, but embrace a feminist foreign policy to curtail gender inequality in the country? South Africa, as we know, or you might be aware, it has all of these beautiful policies. We pride ourselves with our liberal constitution. But we have a huge problem with the disjuncture with implementing all of these policies as a Black woman and in a country that is internationally known to be the rape capital of the world. It prompted me to actually think of ways of pushing the government to look at our policies beyond our domestic borders. But if South Africa can truly make this international commitment that it wants to end issues of gendered violence, issues of homophobia, transphobia, sexism, and misogyny, then probably, even though we are signatories of, a lot of United Nations declarations and so forth, but probably if we can embrace a feminist foreign policy and declare this at an international level, then perhaps we could find a way in mitigating this disjuncture between implementing these beautiful policies and laws that we have. So yeah, I'm looking forward to learn more about, different pillars of feminist foreign policy, and also learn more from other scholars who are in this platform. I'm also very much excited because as I was listening to everyone, all of us, it's like we're from the Global South. So because we know that FFP was the rise from the West or from the Northern scholars, it's very much interesting to see how we can embrace it from our location with our different histories and backgrounds and try to make it work in the different locations in which we're in. So thank you so much. And yeah, I look forward to learning and interacting and engaging with all of you. Thanks.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to introduce themselves? Yes, Ms. Apurva Dikshit, please go ahead.
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Dr. Apurva Dikshit. I'm an assistant professor in law working in a private university in Gurgaon. First of all, I'm very delighted and very happy to hear like-minded people here. It was a delightful evening. The reason why I joined this fellowship was that I have been an ADR enthusiast. I've been working in the aspects of alternate dispute resolution since past a decade of my teaching experience. I wanted to explore the opportunities of including women in the dispute resolution mechanism at a whole, and that is why I structured my research over this policy only, and I wanted to explore these options more. And I'm thankful for the organizers for having this topic of discussion and having very like-minded people in this. Looking forward to engaging in in-depth discussions. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So are there any more participants who are left out? Yes, Ms. Ambika Thapa, please go ahead.
Namaste everyone, I'm Ambika Thapa, currently working at United Nations Population Fund and also a student at Tribhuvan University. And I belong to ethnic people from the mountain of Nepal. So I'm so glad to be in this forum. So first of all, thank you Asia Foundation and IMPRI for organizing this fellowship platform, where it has been a tremendous opportunity for me to learn on the ongoing discourses on feminist foreign policy. And I am particularly interested on the decolonization aspect of it and its global impact. Meanwhile, my proposed study that's focused on the intersectional challenges of exploring gender and disability in humanitarian context of Nepal. I'm aiming to explore on how gender and disability intersect, particularly in context of humanitarian crisis, which you all are aware with the ongoing climate crisis that we are facing in Nepal. And also my research aim to document the voice of women with disabilities, sharing their lived experience and hopefully addressing the unique challenges they face during such time of crisis, when especially the agency of a person is being overlooked or under represented. So hoping that I would be able to collect their stories and be able to bring some attention to the specific challenges that they are facing, and that will enable to advocate for more inclusive policies and hopefully contribute towards addressing humanitarian responses that could better address their current need. So looking forward to learn from all of you. Once again, thank you very much for this incredible opportunity and your time and attention. Thank you.
Thank you. I believe one more participant is left to introduce themselves. I think Ms. Shreya Pandey, please go ahead.
Good evening, everyone. I am Shreya Pandey. I am an assistant professor at St. Xavier's College, Ranchi. I am a student of international relations. I've done my MA, MPhil, PhD in IR, and I belong to the Center for European Studies. So I have always touched at a very peripheral way the gender issues and feminism, but of course I attended these courses with IMPRI, which have really initiated and this curiosity in me to know more about feminism. And I think my building block has been Vibhuti ma'am, because she has actually taught and she makes things so simple to understand. And I teach public administration also. So actually I would like to understand for my research as to how does political leadership help in pursuing the feminist agenda. And I would also like to see what women especially are doing. And as we discussed today, that women are not feminists essentially. So that is another aspect that I would like to explore. Thank you so much for this wonderful opportunity provided to me by IMPRI. I look forward to learning from everyone, the panelists and the participants. Thank you.
Thank you to all the participants for your introductions. I now invite Professor Vibhuti Patel to kindly share closing remarks for the day.
Yeah. I think when I heard the Miss Stephenie Foster, I was just reminded of Martin Luther King's 1963 speech, I Have a Dream. And I think it's very important, though we know that the issues are mind-boggling, geopolitical problems make us disheartened. It is always very traumatic to read newspaper in the morning, seeing so much of bloodshed and so much of this. But I think it is very important. You are going to be, all of us are going to be the conscience keeper for this humanity. And I think feminists have always argued that objectivity is culturally defined. It is associated with masculinity. So objectivity is always partial. And I think that is the very important to understand, that whenever there is a power relations, there are the definition of objectivity is going to be defined by the people in power and those who, civil society, or those who are contesting it. I think that dynamics we need to understand when we talk about feminist foreign policy. The national interest is multidimensional, so it cannot be defined by only one set of interests of the dominant man, as Stephenie ji told us about the pale and Yale, the domination of pale, Yale, and men. Power as domination and control privileges masculinity. Feminist foreign policy tries to come up with the possibilities for using power as a collective empowerment in international arena, and all political action has a moral significance, and it is not possible to separate politics from morality. So I think the question of WPS, women, peace, and agenda that we have, that is very important, because it is guided by morality of universal human right, human dignity, and the expansion of the horizons of right. It is not only about just peace as a without justice or just territorial peace, but it has to be the peace that comes from the political economy, the right to food, right to education, right to health, which has to be accessible to everyone, and how the international instruments and the global institutions are creating certain policies which can go against the people, as we saw the human miseries which were imposed by the stabilization policies, where all the developing countries had to curtail, they were forced to curtail their social sector budget, and the human miseries that it created. And from that, the idea of gender responsive budgeting that emerged. A narrowly defined political realm defines the political in a way that excludes concerns of intersectionality, intersectionally vulnerable communities facing multiple marginalities of caste, race, ethnicity, religion, location, class, gender, and ignores contribution of women and gender minorities. So I think this context and the pretext, they add to the relevance of feminist foreign policy to materialize as legitimate means of conducting international affairs of the state. And I think the way all the participants have asked such a sharp and extremely relevant questions, I think that has made today's first day extremely meaningful, and it has also enthused us that the coming sessions are going to be equally interesting, where there will be discussions on women's role in post-conflict context in South Asian perspective, peace and conflict resolution, and feminist solutions which have been experimented and which have been successfully implemented in countries like Somalia, Rwanda. Intersectionality and gender mainstreaming in global South, engendering national security and international relations, peace and conflict resolution, the feminist solutions, and also practicing feminist foreign policy from the male diplomats perspective and also women diplomats perspective. So we are going to have presentation by the people who are very much into diplomacy, who are into negotiation, and they will share the perspective and the international law, the instruments of the global instruments, and the whole jurisprudence in women, peace, and security agenda, and also the question of gender, power, and peace. Question of refugees, I think that was also flagged off today, and the politics of feminization of refugee subjects, ideating feminist foreign policy for global South. That would be the overarching concern in all these discourses. And I'm really very, very satisfied that last 6 months of efforts of the team IMPRI and team the Asia Foundation have materialized in such a excellent way, where all the participants are very, very committed and seriously interested in examining the most challenging issues of our planet. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am. With this, I proceed to the formal vote of thanks as we conclude day one of the session. Feminist Foreign Policy Fellowship, FFPF, an online international winter school program, a 3-month immersive online introductory leadership certificate training fellowship program. I, Meenu, researcher at IMPRI, would like to express my gratitude on behalf of the Asia Foundation, New Delhi, IMPRI Center for International Relations and Strategic Studies, and IMPRI Gender Impact Studies Centers, GISC, New Delhi. And I would also like to thank Ms. Nandita Baruah for her inspiring fellowship launch address and to Dr. Simi Mehta for her warm welcoming statement, setting the stage for our fellowship journey. A special thanks to Mr. Stephenie Foster for her invaluable contribution to today's inaugural session. Your insights have provided us with a strong foundation for the discussions that will follow. Additionally, my heartfelt appreciation goes to Professor Vibhuti Patelji for her guidance and for chairing this session with so much dedication. We would also like to thank our participants for raising important questions and contributing to the thoughtful dialogue that is essential to this fellowship. We look forward to seeing you all on October 25th, 2024, Friday, for our next session, which will feature Professor Sanjukta Bhattacharya speaking on feminist foreign policy, origins and trajectory in theory and practice, and Dr. Keshav Giri discussing decolonial feminist future. Thank you all for your engagement today. We hope that this fellowship will be a transformative and enriching experience for each of you. Have a great day.
Thank you, Meenu Mohan, for so seamlessly moderating the session, such a long session of more than 3 hours, 20 minutes. It's quite a long session.
And Meenu is
But
ready.
it was so engaging. All of us were 100% engaged.
Ma'am, Meenu
Yeah.
2:30 बजे से ही बैठी है.
हाँ, hello?
मीनू 2:30 बजे से ही बैठी है.
वही तो बहुत so
5 घंटे. Very good.
and she's smiling, not showing her tiredness, and really totally engaged. No, really commendable.
Thank you. Thank you.
So what are you doing? Are you scholar? Research?
I'm a research intern here, but I'm also preparing for the civil services exam.
Okay. Yeah.